Yo legends, welcome back to the channel. Grab your headphones and lock in because today's story is on another level. Want the next chapter? Drop a comment below, and if the legend continues, I'm bringing it straight to you. Disclaimer, I do not claim ownership of this story. All rights belong to the original creators. Note, I'm constantly tweaking the settings to make it as immersive as possible. Reborn and the boys with a Plunder system. My target is Homelander. https://bookpick. Web novel. com/book cover/34quadrillion659 Image Mogger 2/thumbnail/600x. And image ID equals 1,770,309,396,781. 1. Chapter 1. Welcome to the worst superhero world ever. The first sensation was the pain. It was a rhythmic throb at the base of my skull, like someone was driving a railroad spike into my cerebellum with a metronome. It was the dry-mouthed misery of a hangover that usually followed a night of tequila and bad decisions, yet my memory banks were coming up empty. No neon lights, no burning throat, no taste of lime and regret. Just a blank where the last few hours of my life should have been. The second sensation was touch, and it was confusingly luxurious. The fabric against my skin wasn't the scratchy polyester blend of my IKEA duvet. It was silky, cool, liquid, and obscenely soft. It felt like sleeping inside a cloud that cost more than my tuition. I lay still, afraid that moving would shatter the illusion or spike the headache, trying to claw back a memory. Nothing, it was like trying to catch smoke in a hurricane. 1 minute, the familiar air of my cramped apartment. Next, this velvet void. With a groan that vibrated unpleasantly in my chest, I forced my eyelids apart. The light was the first insult. It was the soft gold of early morning filtering through glass. It was a cavernous space, a bedroom designed by someone who hated clutter and loved burning money. The furniture was sleek, black, and sharp-edged, sitting on plush dark carpets that looked deep enough to drown in. To my left, a door stood ajar, teasing the white gleam of marble. But it was the wall opposite the bed that stole the breath from my lungs. It was entirely glass, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of a skyline that was decidedly not the one I went to sleep in. My heart gave a frantic thud against my ribs, kickstarting a drum solo of pure adrenaline. Hospital, no. No beeping, no antiseptic smell, no nurses in Crocs. Kidnapping, why? I was a student drowning in debt with a credit score that made lenders weep. My organs were marinated in caffeine and stress. They weren't worth the cost of these sheets. I threw the covers off, panic overriding the headache. The room tilted violently, a carousel spinning off its axis, but I ignored the nausea. I looked down. The scream died in my throat, choked off by sheer confusion. The body wasn't mine. My hands were large, pale, and elegant, like a pianist who strangled people on the weekends. I flexed fingers that felt mile-long. I stared at the chest, which was dusted with dark hair. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. They were roped with lean muscle that I definitely hadn't earned at the gym. I stood up and the floor felt miles away. I was tall, significantly, powerfully tall. Stumbling on limbs that felt like someone else's equipment, I lurched toward the bathroom. The cool shock of marble against my bare soles grounded me slightly. The bathroom was larger than my old apartment, smelling of sandalwood and money. But I didn't care about the rainfall shower or the jacuzzi tub. I gripped the edge of the twin vanity, my knuckles turning white, and forced myself to look into the mirror. A stranger stared back, and God, he was annoying. He was handsome in that mathematically unfair way that makes normal people hate you on sight. High, aristocratic cheekbones, a jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and hair the color of midnight, falling in a messy style that probably cost $300 to maintain. His eyes were a dark brown. Right now, those honey brown eyes were wide with animalistic terror. I raised a hand to my face. The reflection mimicked me perfectly. I poked the stranger's cheek. I felt the skin smooth, shaved clothes, and real. "Okay," I whispered. The voice was a stranger's, too, a smooth baritone that resonated in this broad chest. "Don't panic," the baritone said. "Do not panic." I was absolutely panicking. My mind was running a marathon on a hamster wheel. Psychotic break? Coma dream? Simulation? I grabbed the black leather wallet sitting on the marble counter, my new hands shaking violently. I flipped it open. Platinum cards glinted under the vanity lights. I yanked out the driver's license. The face was the one in the mirror. Name, Arian Spencer. Arian, I tested the name. It felt foreign, like trying to chew on a rock. Arian Spencer. I needed context. I needed to know who this tailored mannequin was. I stumbled back into the bedroom, ripping open the closet doors. It was a walk-in, filled with rows of suits that whispered executive power. On a velvet ottoman, I found a pair of discarded trousers and a dress shirt. I rifled through the pockets like a desperate junkie. Nothing but a receipt for a dinner that cost more than my car. I turned away from the closet, my breath hitching as I looked back at the massive window. The city outside was waking up. Sunlight glinted off steel and glass, a sprawling metropolis that stretched to the horizon, but my eyes were drawn to the anchor of the skyline. It was a monolith, a colossal tower of black glass and steel that dwarfed everything around it, rising like a dark needle trying to puncture the heavens. And near the top, blazing in the morning light, was a logo. A stylized V. The air left the room. The temperature seemed to plummet 20 degrees in a second. My blood turned to slush in my veins. Vought Tower. My knees gave out. I didn't make a decision to sit. Gravity just reclaimed me. I slid down the cool glass of the window until I hit the floor, staring up at that damn tower. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a hallucination. This was worse. I was in the universe of the boys. The realization hit with the kinetic energy of a freight train. I wasn't just in a different city. I was in a meat grinder. A world where superheroes were corporate products, narcissists, and sociopaths draped in spandex, and the American flag. A world where collateral damage was a line item on a quarterly budget. Homelander. The name alone sent a spike of pure dread through my nervous system. A man with the power of a god and the emotional maturity of a toddler who dropped his ice cream. F***K, I breathed, the word trembling. F***K, F***K, F***K. I was a normal guy. Well, a rich and handsome guy now, apparently, but inside, I was prey. In this world, unless you had Compound V running through your veins, you were just an ant waiting for a boot. And even if you did have powers, you were usually just a slightly more durable ant. I sat there for an eternity, watching the sun climb higher, illuminating the Vought logo like a cruel eye watching the city. Eventually, the hyperventilation slowed. The crushing weight on my chest lightened just enough to let air in. Panic was useful for running away from tigers, but for existential displacement, it was just exhausting. Freaking out wouldn't teleport me home. Screaming wouldn't edit the script. I was here, I was Arian Spencer, and I really, really didn't want to die. I pushed myself up, my legs still feeling like jelly but holding my weight. I needed to survive. That was the new baseline. Figure out who Arian is, figure out his connection to Vought, and stay off the radar of anyone wearing a cape. Just as the resolve began to harden in my gut, a sound cut through the silence. Ding! It was a digital chime that resonated directly inside my parietal lobe. I froze. A blue light flickered into existence, floating in the air right in front of my face. It coalesced into a semi-transparent screen, the kind you see in sci-fi movies, hovering at eye level. System booting, 10%, 50%, 100%. Host's mental state has stabilized. Commencing activation sequence. Welcome, host, to the plundering system. Or, as I like to call it, you're trying not to die in a world full of asshole superheroes starter kit. I blinked. The text remained, glowing with a mockery-filled blue hue. I waved my hand through it. My fingers passed through mist, but the text remained overlaid on my vision. What the actual hell? I whispered, my voice cracking. A voice answered. It echoed inside my skull, crisp, genderless, and sounding distinctly amused. Took you long enough to calm down? I was getting bored here. You humans and your existential crises. Honestly, so dramatic. You stare at a wall for 40 minutes and call it coping. Who are you? I asked the empty air, spinning around, looking for a speaker, a hidden camera, anything. And the system, Your friendly neighborhood golden ticket, your cosmic cheat code, your tour guide through this star-spangled S***W. You can just call me System, or Oh Mighty Savior. I answer to both. P.S. Relax, guys. The system or any higher power is not plotting against the MC, haha. I gave the system this kind of personality because there's going to be a lot of murder in the story, like really a lot. So I wanted to add some funny moments and use the system to explain certain functions in a more entertaining way. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 2 Chapter 2 gift pack, transmigration and a system. It was the holy grail of internet fiction tropes, the narrative equivalent of winning the lottery while simultaneously being struck by lightning. It was so agonizingly cliché that a bubble of jagged laughter clawed its way up my throat. Of course, I choked out, the sound bouncing off the high-end minimalist furniture. Why not? Throw in a magic ring and a wise old grandpa, and we'll have a full set. Exactly, why not? The system's voice chimed, seemingly delighted by my encroaching insanity. Look, you're the new guy, fresh meat in the grinder. This world is specifically designed to turn ambitious people into red paste on the pavement. So, management, don't ask, they don't do lunch, has seen fit to provide you with a complimentary starting gift pack. Consider it a noob protection bundle. We don't want you dying in the tutorial. The blue screen hovering before me shimmered, the text dissolving into a new list that made my breath hitch. Gift pack contents: Super Soldier Serum, Hacking Mastery, Firearm Mastery, Combat Mastery. Would you like to receive your gifts now, host? Just say yes, nod your head, or interpret it through interpretive dance. I'm not picky, I just need confirmation. I stared at the floating words. My hesitation lasted less than a second. In a world where Homelander could laser a plane out of the sky because he was having a bad hair day, being a normal human was a terminal diagnosis. Yes, I said, my voice hardening. Awesome, commencing integration. Fair warning, this might feel a little weird, and by weird I mean invasive. Weird was an understatement. The Super Soldier Serum felt like a celestial lightning strike aimed directly at my mitochondria. A white-hot river of energy detonated in my chest, surging outward with the ferocity of a breaking dam. It tore through my veins, invading every cell, every fiber of muscle, and every strand of DNA. It wasn't painful, exactly. It was a sensation dialed up to 11. I felt my muscles coil and tighten, the fibers knitting together with the density of steel cables. I felt my bones increasing in density, humming with a profound solidity. Then my senses exploded. The world suddenly came into terrifyingly high definition. The ambient hum of the penthouse's HVAC system became a rhythmic thrumming I could feel in my teeth. The scent of coffee drifted in from a neighboring apartment, distinct and separate from the smell of expensive leather and my own rising sweat. The headache from the hangover vanished instantly, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like waking up for the first time in my life. My body, already aesthetic in the mirror, now felt like a predatory machine, idling with suppressed horsepower. But the system wasn't done. The hacking mastery hit me next. It was a waterfall of blue data cascading directly into my cerebral cortex. Encryption algorithms, network architectures, zero-day exploits, and decades of computer science crammed into a single second. A sharp spike of pressure bloomed behind my eyes, a migraine trying to form, but it was washed away by a cool wave of absolute understanding. I glanced at the sleek smartphone resting on the bedside table. I looked at it and saw the vulnerabilities in its OS, the backdoors, the pathways. I knew how to turn it into a remote listening device or brick it from across the room without touching a button. Then came the firearm mastery. Images flashed through my mind like a stroboscopic nightmare. The weight of a Glock 19, the recoil of an M4 carbine, the delicate trigger pull of a Barrett .50 cal. I understood ballistics, windage, and elevation. I knew how to strip a rifle blindfolded and reassemble it before a coin hit the ground. My hands twitched, fingers curling around imaginary grips, muscle memory forming for weapons I had never held. Finally, the combat mastery. This was the most violent integration. It was a storm of kinetic energy downloading into my nervous system. Over 100 martial arts flooded my consciousness. Judo, Jiu-Jitsu, Ninjutsu, Krav Maga, Muay Thai, boxing. I felt the snap of a broken arm in a joint lock, the impact of a shin against a femur. My body learned how to move with lethal economy. I knew how to kill with a strike to the throat, how to disable with a touch, how to turn my own body into a weapon of mass destruction. When the deluge finally stopped, I slumped against the floor-to-ceiling window, gasping for air. Sweat dripped from my nose, landing on the expensive carpet. I stood up slowly. The room hadn't changed, but I was fundamentally different. 10 minutes ago, I was prey. Now. I looked at my right hand. The fingers were steady, the veins slightly more prominent. I felt a hum of power beneath the skin. I needed to test it. I reached for the handle of the heavy glass door that led to the balcony. It was a solid piece of brushed steel, designed to look sleek. I wrapped my fingers around the cool metal. I squeezed. Crunch. The sound was sickening, like a robotic bone snapping. The brushed steel deformed in my grip, twisting and buckling like soft modeling clay. Metal groaned and sheared under the pressure of my fingers. I stared at the ruined handle, then at my palm. Not a scratch. "See, told you it would be awesome," the system chirped, its voice echoing in my head with the enthusiasm of a proud parent. "You're not exactly Homelander. Let's not get C***Y, but you could definitely give that shield-throwing fraud Captain America a run for his money. Congratulations, Arian. You've graduated from helpless civilian to low-level badass." I released the mangled steel, letting the metal fragments drop to the floor. "All right, system," I thought, pushing myself away from the window and wiping the sweat from my brow. The initial shock was fading, replaced by a cold pragmatism. Explain everything. No more surprises. I want to know exactly what you are, what you can do, and how I can survive this psychotic circus. Your wish is my command. Let's pull up the user manual. Try not to fall asleep. The blue screen flickered and refreshed, displaying a minimalist interface. System interface. Host, Arian Spencer. Experience points XP, 0. Powers, none. Inventory, 50 grids. Okay, let's break it down, the system began, shifting into the tone of a slightly sarcastic tour guide. This is your main dashboard. You can control it with your thoughts or by gesturing with your hands like you're conducting an orchestra. Personally, I recommend hand gestures when you're alone. Makes you feel like a sci-fi wizard. Very chic. I raised a hand and swiped left in the air. The screen followed the movement instantly. I focused my mind and willed it to swipe back. It was seamless. First up, inventory, the system continued. You've got 50 grids. Think of them as magic pockets that ignore physics. You can store pretty much anything in them as long as it isn't currently breathing. The best part, each grid acts like a video game slot. It can hold an unlimited number of the same item. You want to stack $1 million in one grid? Go for it. 1,000 assault rifles in another? Easy. To use it, just focus on an item and think store or retrieve. I looked around the room and focused on a decorative velvet pillow sitting on a nearby armchair. I reached out with my mind. Store. The pillow vanished. I looked at the interface. The first grid now showed a smolicon of the pillow. Retrieve. The pillow materialized in my hand instantly. It was exactly as it had been. This was a F***G logistical warehouse. Next, the main event, the reason I'm called the plundering system. It's all in the name, my friend. This is the part where we turn you into a predator. When you kill a person with superpowers, I can plunder their ability. I froze. Plunder their ability? You mean I can take their powers? Permanently. Bingo, give the man a cigar. Here's the mechanics. Once you land the killing blow on a Supe. And it has to be a kill, no knockouts. A message will pop up. You'll have a choice to make. Option A is to retain the power. If you choose that, the power becomes yours. If you kill a Tier 3 Supe, you get their Tier 3 power. Simple as that. And Option B, I asked. Option B is for the discerning host who prefers to grind and level up. You can choose to convert the power into experience points, or XP for short. Think of it as recycling. Instead of keeping a useless power, you break it down into XP. The interface screen shifted, displaying a glowing green chart. XP conversion rates. Tier 1 power conversion, 5,000 XP. Tier 2 power conversion, 3,000 XP. Tier 3 power conversion, 1500 XP. Tier 4 power conversion, 500 XP. Tier 5 power conversion, 100 XP. And what do I do with all this shiny XP? I asked rhetorically, though I already had a hunch. You upgrade. Let's say you plunder a garbage tier 5 power like, I don't know, the ability to communicate with squirrels. You can use XP to force that power up the evolutionary chain. Another chart appeared, this one read. Power upgrade costs. Tier 5 right arrow tier 4, 500 XP. Tier 4 right arrow tier 3, 1500 XP. Tier 3 right arrow tier 2, 3000 XP. Tier 2 right arrow tier 1, 5000 XP. I stared at the numbers. It was the gamification of murder, a perfectly designed loop to incentivize hunting. If I wanted to survive Homelander, I couldn't just hide. I had to hunt. I had to become the apex predator in a city full of monsters. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 3, Chapter 3, Tragedy in Midtown. The glowing blue numbers hovered in the center of my vision, casting an artificial luminescence against the expensive darkness of the penthouse. My mind worked through the arithmetic with a slow pace, treating the spectral interface less like a game menu and more like a ledger that needed balancing. The economy of this system was elegant in its cruelty. To take power from Tier 4 to Tier 3 required an investment of 1,500 XP. I looked at the conversion chart again, tracing the lines of light with my eyes. That was the exact amount I would receive from converting a plundered Tier 3 power. The logic was ruthless, a perfect circle of consumption. It meant I could sacrifice one ability to strengthen another. I could cannibalize the weak to feed the strong. It was a zero-sum game played with human souls. So I said, my voice sounding jarringly loud in the quiet room. To upgrade a power to Tier 1, I'd need to kill another Tier 1 Supe and convert their power. Or strip mine a small army of lesser heroes. Precisely, the system's text scrolled rapidly. High risk, high reward. Or you could go the grinder route, kill a whole bunch of lower-tier sups, save up your pennies, and buy the big upgrade. The choice is yours. Now you're probably wondering, how do I know what tier a Supe is before I try to punch them? Easy. My final feature is a built-in scanner. The interface shifted. The menu dissolved, replaced by a minimalist targeting reticle that hovered in the center of my gaze. It looked like the heads-up display of a fighter jet, overlaying reality with a silent promise of violence. Just look at any Supe, and I'll show you their basic specs: name, powers, and most importantly, their tier. Tier 1 is the strongest, think Homelander. Tier 5 is the bottom of the barrel, like that guy with hammers for hands, or the one who can only fly while holding his breath. This way, you'll know whether to fight, flee, or start drafting your last will and testament. I absorbed the information, letting the implications settle. The system represented a complete package for survival. It gave me a tangible path to power in a world where power was the only currency that held any value. It was a roadmap through a minefield, offering a way to climb the food chain in an ecosystem where I was currently listed as appetizer. But there was a catch, a jagged hook hidden in the bait. To use it, I had to kill. The silence in the room becomes oppressive. This wasn't a video game, despite the gamified interface floating before my eyes. The XP represented lives. To grow stronger, I had to become a predator. A small price to pay for godhood, don't you think? The system commented. It read my hesitation with unnerving accuracy, its tone shifting to something darker. Besides, most of the sups in this world are scum. You'd be doing the world a favor. Think of it as aggressive recycling. It had a point, albeit a cynical one. I stood there, staring at a piece of abstract art on the wall, weighing the morality of murder against the terrifying prospect of my own demise. I wasn't an executioner by nature. In my old life, the most violent thing I had ever done was scream at a guy for scratching my bumper. But I wasn't a saint, either. I was a man trapped in a nightmare scenario, surrounded by golden gods who viewed humans as ants to be crushed underfoot. If the choice lay between my life and the life of some Supe abusing their power, I knew exactly which side of the equation I would choose. The knot in my stomach loosened slightly, replaced by a cold stone of resolve. One final question remained: a puzzle piece I had been ignoring in favor of survival mechanics. I looked down at the plastic card still gripped in my hand. The name Spencer stared back at me in bold letters. It was a name tag on a life I had stolen. "System?" I asked, keeping my eyes fixed on the license as if staring at it hard enough would conjure the ghost of the man I had replaced. "Who is Arian Spencer?" About that, whoops." The system's voice sounded genuinely sheepish. The arrogant tone was replaced by the awkwardness of someone who had forgotten to feed the cat for a week. "My bad, host. My sincerest apologies. In all the excitement of activating and giving you the cool starter pack, I forgot a crucial step. See, when you first woke up, you were having a full-blown panic attack. Your mental state was, let's say, fragile. If I'd tried to dump a lifetime of memories into your brain right then, you probably would have short-circuited. So I paused the memory transfer for your own safety." I blinked, processing the explanation. It made a twisted sort of sense. My mind had barely handled the transition to a new body and a new universe. A flood of alien memories on top of that trauma might have shattered my psyche completely. "But you're cool as a cucumber now. Ready for the info dump? It'll feel like remembering a movie you've already seen, but in 4D. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the filtered air of the penthouse. I steadied myself against the heavy wooden dresser, gripping the edge until my knuckles turned white. "Do it," I said. "All right, hold onto your hat." It felt like waking up from a dream where you had amnesia, only to have your entire life come rushing back in a torrent of images, sounds, and emotions. The sensation was like water filling a dry basin. I was Arian Spencer. I am 25 years old. The images flashed by with dizzying speed, settling into the chronological library of my mind. I saw a childhood spent in sprawling estates that felt more like museums than homes. I recalled the quiet hum of high-end security systems and the hushed tones of household staff who were paid to be invisible. I saw the faces of nannies who changed every year, their names blurring together into a composite face of indifference. I remembered tutors instead of teachers. I remembered business lunches instead of playdates. Isolation was the defining theme of my youth, a golden cage built of expectations and trust funds. Then came the faces of my parents, James and Alina Spencer. They were brilliant people, titans of industry who moved nations with a phone call. They were ruthless business operators, and they were emotionally distant figures who viewed me more as an heir rather than a son. There were no warm hugs in these memories, only firm handshakes, performance reviews, and discussions about quarterly projections over dinner. I remembered the phone call, the sudden news of their death in a private plane crash 5 years ago. It was a memory that felt suspiciously convenient, sharp with the metallic tang of conspiracy. It left me the sole heir to their empire at the age of 20. I remembered the funeral, a sea of black umbrellas and sharks in expensive suits pretending to grieve while eyeing the throne. I remembered the lack of tears. I remembered learning to wear the mask. I saw the man in the mirror wearing it effortlessly in 1,000 different reflections. The easy smile, the polite charm, the disarming joke that put people at ease. It was a persona honed to perfection through years of private schooling and corporate training. It was designed to navigate boardrooms and black tie galas, to project a friendly charisma that made powerful people underestimate me while I maneuvered around them. Spencer Industries. The name landed in my mind with the weight of a monolith. We were an unlisted titan, a ghost in the machine of global power with a valuation north of $100 billion. We were not in the superhero business like Vought. We didn't deal in capes, movie deals, or plushie sales. We were in the war business. Spencer Industries was one of the world's foremost private military contractors. We handled advanced weapons development that made the military's standard-issue gear look like toys. We managed private intelligence networks that rivaled the CIA. We ran cutting-edge cyber warfare divisions capable of crippling national grids. We provided logistical support for operations governments couldn't publicly sanction. Vought sold the public a fantasy of safety with their caped celebrities. We sold the stark reality of power to the highest bidder. Our influence touched every major conflict and corporate espionage case on the planet. The memories clicked into place like puzzle pieces, forming a complete picture of the life I now possessed. I stood taller, my posture unconsciously adjusting to fit the confidence of the man I now was. The slouch of a debt-ridden student vanished, replaced by the spine of a billionaire. I had transmigrated into a position of incredible power. This penthouse was mine. The highly trained security team in the lobby worked for me. The fleet of armored cars in the garage belonged to me. The billions in the bank were at my disposal. The bone-deep fear of being a helpless victim in this brutal world burned away, incinerated by the realization of my resources. I had wealth, influence, and a private army at my back. The plundering system gave me a path to personal power, but Arian Spencer's life gave me the perfect cover and the perfect tools to execute my plans. My new starting point wasn't ground zero. It was the damn stratosphere. With this complete understanding of my identity came an urgent need for context. I knew who I was, but I needed to know when I was. I needed to get a handle on the current world events. I was about to turn to look for a computer when my eyes caught the massive flat-screen TV mounted flush against the wall opposite the bed. I walked to the bedside table, picked up the remote, and clicked it on. The screen flared to life, tuned to a 24-hour news channel. The banner at the bottom scrolled with urgent red text, breaking news. A female anchor with perfectly coiffed blonde hair sat behind a desk. She was speaking in a somber tone. Behind her, a graphic read tragedy in Midtown. Details are still emerging, she said, her voice professional but laced with faux empathy. But eyewitnesses report that the victim was standing on the curb when she was struck by the speedster superhero A-Train, a prominent member of the Seven. Vought International has released a statement expressing their deepest condolences and has assured the public that A-Train is cooperating fully with the investigation. The screen cut to shaky cell phone footage. The camera panned wildly, capturing the chaos of a city street. A blue blur zipped past the lens, accompanied by the sonic crack of displaced air that distorted the microphone. The frame stabilized, zooming in on a young man. He was standing on the sidewalk, frozen in a moment of absolute trauma. He was covered in blood, a red mist that coated his face and shirt. In his hands, he held nothing but two severed hands. Robin's hands. My stomach churned violently. I had seen this scene before. I had watched it on my laptop screen in another life, analyzing the special effects, critiquing the CGI. But seeing it here hit me with a visceral force. It was the inciting incident, the very first scene of the show. The realization washed over me like a cold tide. I was at the very beginning of Season 1. Billy Butcher hadn't recruited Huey yet. Translucent was still alive. Homelander's descent into absolute madness was just beginning to accelerate. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the TV screen, superimposed over the tragic news footage of Huey Campbell's ruined life. The handsome face of Arian Spencer stared back at me. I had a new body, a powerful system, and a set of skills that made me a threat to anyone without a capital S on their chest. But I was also standing in the heart of the storm. The first winds were beginning to blow, and I was right in their path. The system's voice cut through my thoughts. Its usual cheerfulness was replaced by a rare moment of sincerity, a solemn acknowledgement of the reality we faced. So it begins. I stared into my own eyes in the reflection, seeing the steel forming behind the honey-colored irises. Yes, I whispered to the empty room, it does. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 4, Chapter 4, Familiarize. The massive television screen swallowed the image of the tragedy. The room was plunged back into silence, but the horror of what I had just seen lingered like the afterimage of a flashbang. I stood there for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. Arian Spencer stared back, his expression grim. In this world, morality was a fairy tale told to victims. There were no gray areas. There were only 2 roles available on the casting sheet. You were either the butcher or you were the cattle. And I had absolutely no intention of being herded into a slaughterhouse. I set the remote down on the bedside table with a deliberate click. The system remained quiet. It seemed to understand that this was a turning point in the sand of my new reality. The initial shock of my transmigration was over. The intoxicating thrill of discovering my new abilities was fading, settling into the jagged calculus of survival. My name, I whispered, the words testing the acoustics of the cavernous room, is Arian Spencer. I needed to feel the weight of it in my throat. I needed to own it. This wasn't just a skin suit anymore. This was my name. This was my company. This was my city. And it was time to stop reacting and start acting like the man who owned all of it. Couldn't have said it better myself, boss. The system's voice chimed in my head, the tone laced with something that sounded like genuine approval. So, what's the first order of business for the newly minted billionaire badass? World domination? Buying a private island. Finally getting that limited edition sneaker you always wanted. I took a deep breath, steadying the tremor in my hands that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. Familiarize, I said aloud. First, I familiarize myself with, well, myself. The memories I had inherited were a library, but I needed to walk the halls. I strode out of the bedroom, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpet, and headed toward the entryway. Mounted on the wall was the central nervous system of the penthouse, a sleek console of tempered glass and brushed aluminum. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. A beam of green light swept across my print, and the device emitted an affirmative chime. The screen flared to life, a cascade of security feeds and contact lists scrolling with fluid precision. I tapped the first name on the roster, Marcus Thorne, head of security. Mr. Spencer, the voice on the other end was instantaneous. Good morning, sir. The audio quality was crystal clear. My memories supplied the dossier on Thorne, former Delta Force, specialized in close protection and threat elimination. He was a man who viewed the world through crosshairs, fiercely loyal to the Spencer family. He was the commander of my personal Praetorian Guard. Marcus, I began. I paused for a microsecond, calibrating my vocal cords. I needed to sound like the man he served. Status report. Anything unusual overnight? All clear, sir, Marcus replied without hesitation. The building's perimeter is secure. We have 0 flags on the network intrusion systems. There are standard Vought News Network reports of a Supe-related collateral incident in Midtown, but it's well outside our sphere of immediate concern. He paused, the rustle of fabric audible over the line. The car is prepped and ready for your 11:00 a.m. meeting with the board. I had completely forgotten about that. It was a quarterly review of Spencer Industries' R&D division. My presence, there was usually more of a formality than a necessity. The company effectively ran itself under a board of directors that my parents had handpicked before their deaths. As long as the profits kept flowing, they were content to let me be the public face of the empire while they handled the logistics. I considered it for a moment. Going to the meeting would be the normal thing to do. It would maintain the illusion that everything was fine, but everything was not fine. I had just arrived in a new universe, and I needed time to breathe. I needed to strategize, not nod at PowerPoint presentations. Cancel the meeting, Marcus, I ordered, my voice flat. Sir, the hesitation was slight, a ripple in his professional veneer. Clear my entire schedule for the foreseeable future, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I'll be working from the penthouse. And Marcus, double the security rotation on this floor. I want eyes on every elevator. No one gets up here without my explicit authorization. Is that understood? The silence on the line lasted exactly 2 seconds. Thorne was recalibrating. Understood, sir, he said, the steel returning to his voice. I'll handle it immediately. Good, I ended the call. Now to inspect the fortress. I moved through the penthouse with the critical eye of a general inspecting a forward operating base. The living area was an exercise in sterile opulence, sharp angles of glass and steel, couches made of leather so fine it felt like skin. It was beautiful, but cold. It felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum for the living. I drifted into the kitchen. It was gleaming with stainless steel appliances that looked like they had never seen a fingerprint, let alone a vegetable. The original Arian Spencer probably thought cooking was something that happened to other people. I bypassed the domesticity and headed down the hallway to the office. The room was a sanctuary of power. The room was dominated by a massive desk hewn from a single slab of polished obsidian, sitting in the center of the room like a sacrificial altar. One entire wall was smart glass, currently set to transparent, offering a view of the city that I ignored. My attention was fixed on the computer. It was a custom-built beast from Spencer Industries' cyber warfare division, a beast of quantum processing and encrypted networking. Multiple monitors were arranged in a commanding semicircle. I sat in the leather chair, the material sighing under my weight. I ran a hand over the dark surface of the obsidian desk. "Ooh, shiny?" the system exclaimed, its voice echoing with childlike glee. "I bet you could use this thing to order a pizza and hack into Vought's payroll at the same time. Let's see if we can find Homelander's porn history. My money's on something deeply weird involving milk." An involuntary smile touched my lips. The system was absurd, a chaotic sprite in my head, but its presence was strangely grounding. "Let's focus on staying alive first," I muttered. I stood up, leaving the computer dark for a moment. There was one more room to check. The memories guided me back to the master bedroom, to a wall paneled in dark mahogany. To the naked eye, it was just expensive woodwork. To me, it was a door. I ran my fingers along the grain until I felt the microscopic seam. I pressed a specific knot in the wood. Hiss! There was a soft hiss of hydraulics. A section of the wall slid smoothly aside, revealing a chamber bathed in cool LED light. I stepped inside. The air was noticeably colder here, climate controlled to minimize humidity. The smell hit me instantly with the intoxicating perfume of gun oil, solvent, and ozone. It was a walk-in vault, a personal armory that would make a Navy SEAL blush. Rows of firearms were mounted on magnetic racks against the slate-gray walls. Pistols, submachine guns, assault rifles, and a high-caliber sniper rifle that looked capable of punching a hole through an engine block. My firearm mastery flared to life. It was a physical sensation, a tingling in my fingertips. I knew their weight, their trigger pull, the specific grain of powder in their ammunition. My eyes locked onto a matte black handgun resting in a custom molded cradle on the workbench. I picked it up. It was a Spencer Arms Spectre prototype, chambered in .45 ACP with a polymer frame that felt impossibly light yet rigid. It had an integrated suppressor fused to the barrel and a smart scope interface that I knew would sync directly to a contact lens. It fit my hand like it had grown there. I racked the slide and checked the chamber with a fluidity that belonged to a veteran killer, not a business major. "Now we're talking," the system cheered, vibrating with excitement. "Forget the hacking. A few of these and who needs a plan, just walk into Vought Tower and start blasting. Pew pew." I stared at the weapon, admiring the lethal geometry. It was a masterpiece of engineering, but against someone like Homelander, it was a pea shooter. "A plan is why we'll win," I murmured, placing the Spectre back into its cradle with a gentle clack. "Brute force against gods is what gets people like you killed." "Hey," the system protested. "I'm an interdimensional plundering system. My brute force is very classy, artisanal even." I ignored the banter, stepping out of the vault and pressing the release. The wood panel slid back into place, sealing the violence away behind a facade of luxury. I returned to the office, the resolve hardening in my chest like a concrete setting. I sat back down at the obsidian desk and touched the power sensor. The screens flared to life, casting a cobalt glow over the room. The login prompt appeared as a biometric request. I leaned forward. A red laser scanned my retina while a microphone waited for the voice print. "Arian Spencer," I said, my voice steady. The system processed the data, and with a soft chime, I was in. I navigated through the secure OS, bypassing the corporate fluff and diving straight into the financial overview. The screen filled with numbers, columns of assets, and liquid capital that stretched across the monitor. I leaned back, staring at the bottom line. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 5, chapter 5, money. The screen was a wall of numbers, a digital cascade of assets, liabilities, and liquid capital. I leaned back in the leather chair, the cool obsidian desk pressing against my forearms, and let the sheer magnitude of my new reality wash over me. The bank account balance was a latitude. $14,240,000,000. that was just the personal liquid assets. It didn't account for the stock portfolio, the real estate holdings, the offshore accounts, or the valuation of Spencer Industries itself. The Spencer family's wealth was a global web, so deeply integrated into the world economy that it was practically untouchable. I was sitting on a pile of resources that could fund a small country's war for a decade. Money is a superpower, I murmured, the truth of it settling in my bones. Batman wasn't wrong. Holy mother of wow, the system stammered. Okay, new plan. Forget Homelander. Forget Vought. We're buying an island, a big one, with a volcano lair and shark tanks. We'll build our own army and retire in luxury. Deal. A laugh bubbled up in my chest. It felt strange to smile in this situation. Tempting, I admitted. The smile remained on my face as I considered the absurdity of the suggestion. But an island won't stop a flying psychopath with heat vision. Fine, be practical, but I'm officially putting in a request for a shark tank. I shook my head. I closed the financial terminals one by one. So who's first on our non-existent hit list? The question hung in the air. My first kill had to be carefully chosen. I needed to test my new capabilities in a controlled environment. Vought protected their assets fiercely. I needed a target they wouldn't care much about, someone whose absence wouldn't set off alarms. Let's see what this hacking mastery can really do. I cracked my knuckles. The hacking mastery was an instinct that guided my fingers. I looked at the keyboard, and the QWERTY layout looked like a control panel for the digital world. I started small. I wanted to verify the news report, to see the raw data before Vought's spin doctors turned it into a heartwarming story of accidental tragedy. My fingers flew across the mechanical keys, the clicking sound a rapid-fire staccato in the quiet office. I opened a dozen command prompts. My thoughts moved faster than the lines of code scrolling across the monitors. I built a series of cascading proxies in seconds. I routed my digital signature through a labyrinth of servers in a dozen different countries, bouncing the signal from a server farm in Estonia to a satellite link in Brazil, then through a university in Singapore. The security of the NYPD Secure Case File database was formidable, designed to keep out nosy journalists and amateur hacktivists. But to me, it looked like a chain-link fence made of wet paper. I found the tiny flaws in the legacy code, a buffer overflow vulnerability here, and a weak handshake protocol there. I crafted a data packet that mimicked a routine diagnostic request from a precinct in Queens. I sent the packet. The system accepted it without a flutter. Access granted. I was in. I pulled up the dispatch logs for Midtown. Incident 4492B10, 42 a.m. Robin Ward. DOA cause of death. High velocity impact. I scrolled through the officer's initial notes. They were written in the frantic shorthand of a cop who knew he was out of his depth. Vic completely liquefied. Suspect identified as A-Train, the 7. Vought liaison on scene immediately. NDAs issued to witnesses. Cleanup crew arrived at 10:48 a.m. 6 minutes. It took Vought 6 minutes to scrub a murder from the pavement. Efficient scumbags, aren't they? The system noted. If they put half that effort into actually saving people, the world might not be a dumpster fire. They're not in the saving business, I replied, my eyes scanning the redacted files. They're in the image business. I wrote another simple script to scrub the database for specific keywords. I typed Supe, superhuman, collateral, and unexplained phenomena. I cross-referenced those results with another filter. Cases marked closed, sealed, or unresolved within 48 hours of a Vought legal representative being contacted. The data that flooded the monitor was sickening. Hundreds of cases populated the list. Assaults that had been buried under NDA settlements. Robbery reports that went nowhere because the perpetrator wore a cape. Missing persons reports that ended abruptly with insufficient evidence. And murders, so many accidental deaths. Each crime was tied to a different soup. All of them lay buried under a mountain of Vought legal paperwork and hush money. This was the real face of superheroes. A trail of bodies and broken lives, sanitized by a multi-billion-dollar PR machine that bleached the blood out of the pavement. I saved the data to an encrypted drive for insurance. Leverage was always useful. Then, I scrubbed the logs and backed out, leaving no trace I had ever been there. Now for the dirty laundry, I muttered. I navigated to the dark web. It was a place I had only read about in my previous life, a digital sewer where the light of the law didn't reach. But now, I knew exactly where the doors were. I found encrypted forums where the ultra-rich and the criminally connected conducted their business. I scrolled through threads that would make a normal person vomit. They traded in secrets, in illegal weapons, in human trafficking, and sometimes in sups. I found message boards where people hired low-level sups for off-book work, bodyguarding drug shipments, debt collection, and intimidation. These were powered individuals who weren't clean enough for Vought's pristine public image, but were too dangerous to be unemployed. I started cross-referencing again. I pulled names from the buried NYPD files and matched them against usernames and gossip on the underground forums. I was looking for the perfect overlap. A history of criminal behavior, a lack of corporate protection, and a low public profile. I sat in the blue glow of the monitors for hours, the only sound the hum of the cooling fans and my own steady breathing. My eyes skimmed line after line, while my mind slowly pieced the puzzle together. A name surfaced in a complaint thread on a forum for underworld fixers. A client was ranting about a job that had gone bad, blaming a Supe for hire who'd gotten careless and high on the job. The post included a grainy security camera photo of a small man exiting a warehouse. I ran the photo through facial recognition and cross-referenced it with Vought's public registry of sups. A match appeared on the center screen. The file opened to a cheesy promotional image of a man in a cheap costume winking at the camera. Name, Termite. Affiliation, Vought International D-list talent. Public profile, star of the direct-to-streaming film series Ant-Man, a low-budget Vought parody. I focused on the image. The man looked small even in the photo. He looked eager to please, with a manic energy in his eyes that screamed instability. The system's interface flickered to life in the corner of my vision, overlaying the monitor. Target scanned. Name, Termite. Powers, size alteration shrinking. Tier, 4. A Tier 4, he wasn't the absolute bottom of the barrel, but he was close enough to scrape the wood. He was worth 500 XP. It was a solid start. I dug deeper. I hacked into Termite's personal finances, cracked his private social media accounts, and pulled his medical records from Vought's private clinics. He was a mess, a walking disaster. Years of drug abuse, cocaine, meth, and whatever designer compounds Vought pumped into their stars. Overdoses and quiet rehab, stints that the PR team had buried deep. He had a reputation for using his powers in ways that made even other sups uncomfortable, invading privacy, and crawling inside things he shouldn't. He was drowning in debt. He owed money to bookies, dealers, and loan sharks. To keep himself afloat, he'd been taking freelance jobs for local criminals, using his shrinking ability for high-end theft and espionage. His disappearance wouldn't cause panic. If anything, Vought would probably be relieved to strike his liability of a name off the payroll. He was a loose end waiting to be snipped. "So this is our guy?" the system asked, sounding unimpressed. "A shrinking pervert. Seems like a fitting start. Small fry for a big guy." "He was less of a fry and more of a demonstration model," I replied, a predatory amusement stirring within me. "And frankly, my application of his talents will be far more dignified than whatever he's doing now." I checked his location data. He was currently holed up in a stash apartment in a rundown part of the meatpacking district, likely hiding from his creditors. The plan began to form in my mind, assembling itself like the components of a rifle. It was a logical sequence of events. I stood up from the desk, pushing the leather chair back. I walked out of the office and headed toward the hidden wall of the armory. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 6, Chapter 6, Preparation. My fingers traced the intricate machining of a Spencer arms, scythe, assault rifle, the metal a dark promise beneath my touch. It felt impossibly balanced, a beast of precision engineering designed to unleash a torrent of armor-piercing rounds at a staggering 2,000 per minute. "Ooh, pick that one?" The system's voice erupted in my mind, vibrating with undisguised excitement. It's big, it's loud, it makes lots of holes. Very dramatic, we could write our initials on the wall with it. Think of the carnage, the sheer spectacle. We are not here to be dramatic, I stated, my voice a low, echoing quiet of the room. We are here to be ghosts. Ghosts are boring, they just float around and moan, the system retorted, its tone laced with a theatrical sigh of disappointment. You should at least get a cool costume. All black, obviously, with a skull mask. And maybe a cape, a short one though, practical, for dramatic entrances and exits, swooping in and out of the shadows. Imagine the flair. I ignored its relentless suggestions. My gaze drifted past racks of gleaming blades and specialized tools until my eyes settled on the Spectre prototype. I had handled it before. It was the perfect tool for this particular job. I reached for the pistol. Its compact form nestled comfortably in my palm, the polymer grips already feeling familiar. It was integrally suppressed, a marvel of quiet efficiency, and chambered in a subsonic .45 ACP round. This round would hit with the blunt force of a sledgehammer, yet its discharge would register as little more than a polite cough in the still night air. I secured the pistol in a holster and gathered 3 extra magazines. From a meticulously organized display, I selected a combat knife forged from carbon fiber. It was impossibly lightweight, its razor-sharp edge glinting subtly even in the subdued lighting. Its most crucial attribute was its composition, entirely non-metallic. It would pass through metal detectors without a whisper. A weapon designed for close work, where silence was paramount and physical contact inevitable. For encounters requiring a less direct approach, I chose a trio of sleek auto-injectors. Each device contained a fast-acting neurotoxin. The compound itself was derived from a rare deep-sea creature, its potency refined to terrifying efficiency. A single dose was enough to induce full-body paralysis within seconds. It was a way to neutralize a threat without leaving a trace of audible violence. Finally, my hand closed around a small pouch. Inside was a fine powder, meticulously mixed with an even more potent neurotoxin. This was for contingencies, for situations where an airborne agent was the most effective solution. I moved to my personal closet. The clothing I chose was a deliberate uniform of anonymity. Black cargo pants, their numerous pockets offering practical storage for my chosen tools. A long-sleeved athletic shirt, designed to keep me comfortable and unencumbered during prolonged activity. Over this, a dark gray jacket, offering just enough concealment for the pistol at the small of my back. To complete the ensemble, I added a pair of black leather gloves, their supple material allowing for tactile precision, and a simple black neck gaiter, a versatile piece of fabric that could be pulled up to effortlessly obscure the lower half of my face. I paused, catching my reflection in the highly polished steel of the vault door. The figure staring back was deliberately unremarkable. "All right, fine, I see what you're going for," the system conceded, its earlier enthusiasm replaced by an almost aggrieved sigh. The generic Thug 3 look, very understated, very tactical. I'll just call you the accountant because you're dressed for a hostile audit and you're about to make sure someone's accounts are permanently closed. Get it? It's clever, right? A little dark humor to lighten the mood before we get down to business. Hilarious, I deadpanned, my voice completely flat. I made my way to a secondary garage. This was where Arian Spencer kept his real vehicles, the ones not meant for public display. My eyes scanned the subdued space, coming to rest on a black sedan. On the surface, it appeared to be a standard German luxury car. But beneath its innocuous exterior lay the true craftsmanship of Spencer Industries. As I approached, the car's presence was almost a silent hunter. Its windows were bulletproof. The tires were run flats, capable of sustaining extreme damage and still carrying me to safety. And the engine capable of unleashing a surge of power that could outrun almost anything on the road. Most importantly, it possessed a rotating license plate system, rendering it virtually impossible to link back to its owner or its current driver. The city lights of New York spread out before me through the tinted windshield. It was a metropolis of 8 million stories, each one a universe of its own. Tonight, I was going to write the final chapter for just one of those stories. The drive to the meatpacking district was smooth. I let the car's integrated navigation system handle the intricacies of the route, my mind a laser focus on the impending mission. This was the point of no return, the threshold crossed with every passing street lamp and every fading memory of my previous life. "You're surprisingly calm about this," the system remarked, its voice tinged with genuine curiosity. "First time killing someone in this life. No jitters, no moral quandaries, not even a little bit of pre-murder nausea? Most people get at least a twitch, a flicker of doubt, a faint tremor in their hands. You're like a statue." "The man I was before is gone," I replied, the words echoing in the silent expanse of my own mind. "He died and I woke up here. The only thing that matters now is survival and adapting to this new reality. And Termite, he was not innocent. My meticulous research had painted a clear picture. He was a man who reveled in exploiting and abusing those weaker than himself, a predator cloaked in the guise of a gifted individual. Taking him off the board was a net positive for the world. A small one, but a positive nonetheless. This was how I justified it, a logical equation balancing life and death. This was the unyielding logic that kept my hands steady. "Pest control, I get it," the system chirped, a flicker of its usual playful tone returning, though with an underlying understanding. "Can't build a new house if the foundation is full of termites. Hey, that's ironic. Get it? Termite and termites? Oh, I slay myself." I ignored the system's self-congratulatory chuckle. I eased the sedan into a dark spot under an overpass, 3 blocks away from the target building. It was an interstitial space, a patch of urban neglect where shadows clung deep. I cut the engine, plunging the interior into a silent darkness. The car seemed to melt seamlessly into the surrounding gloom. I spent a few minutes scanning the street. It was a forgotten corner of the city. A few homeless figures huddled around a barrel fire further down the block, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. The occasional car rumbled past, its headlights briefly slicing through the darkness before disappearing into the night. No one, absolutely no one, was paying any attention to the silent black sedan or its occupant. I pulled out a burner phone, a clean device meticulously selected from the armory, devoid of any personal history or traceable connections. Within moments, I had connected to the target building's public Wi-Fi. A quick diagnostic scan confirmed my earlier suspicions. The security was a laughable mockery, a consumer-grade router still broadcasting with a default password, an open invitation to any moderately skilled intruder. It was the digital equivalent of leaving the front door wide open. I was inside his network in less than a second. I quickly located the security camera feeds. 4 low-resolution cameras covered the lobby and the main hallways, their grainy images a testament to the building's neglect. With a few swift commands, I looped the last 5 minutes of footage. I opened the car door and stepped out. The air was a cold, carrying with it the acrid tang of decaying garbage and the metallic scent of the nearby river. I pulled the black neck gaiter up over my nose and mouth, the smooth fabric cool against my skin, effectively obscuring the lower half of my face. The lobby was empty, a testament to years of indifference. The security monitor above the dented mailboxes displayed the looped image, an endless moment frozen in time. My movements were utterly silent, each step precisely placed, each breath controlled. I ascended the 4 flights of stairs to Termite's floor without making a single sound. The hallway on the 4th floor was dimly lit. I approached the door and pressed my ear against it. From within, I could clearly discern the thumping bass of music and a man's obnoxious laughter. My super soldier hearing picked up the finer details, the delicate clink of a glass against a table, the soft rustle of fabric, the irregular rhythm of his breathing. He was alone and high. His senses were dulled. I retrieved a lockpick gun from my pocket. Within moments, the cheap lock gave way with a soft snick. The apartment was a disaster. Clothes were strewn everywhere. Empty takeout containers, their greasy remnants still clinging to the styrofoam. The air was a thick, cloying smell of marijuana, mingled with the stale scent of unwashed clothes and old food. And there, sprawled on a stain, was Termite. He was in his late 30s, his receding hairline starkly visible, his paunch straining against the cheap fabric of his t-shirt. In one hand, he clutched a half-empty bottle of amber whiskey. His eyes were fixed blankly on the muted television screen, a flicker of images playing silently before his unseeing gaze. He was lost in his own hazy world of intoxication and self-indulgence. I slipped inside, closing the door behind me with a barely audible click, a sound no louder than a sigh. I moved gracefully to the center of the room, a silent shadow in his filthy sanctuary. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 7, Chapter 7, Termite. Party's over, Termite, I stated, my voice muffled by the black fabric of the neck gaiter. Termite jolted violently on the stained sofa, his body spasming in a grotesque caricature of surprise. He struggled to focus on my masked form. Who the hell are you? How did you get in here? The door was unlocked, I lied smoothly. You should be more careful with your privacy. Fear surged on his face, touched by familiar anxiety. This was the anxiety of a man perpetually on the run from his debts. Are you from Vought? He stammered, his voice tinged with a desperate plea. Listen, I was gonna pay Stan, I swear. I just need a little more time, a couple more jobs, a big score, and I'll have his money. Just tell him I'm good for it. Relax, I said. I'm not here for the money. I'm from Vought's Human Resources Department. I took a slow step forward. From a concealed pocket in my cargo pants, I retrieved a small pouch of dark leather. Vought is developing a new drug, I continued, weaving my intricate deception. Something to give our assets an extra edge. We're running preliminary field tests with a select group of former associates, individuals with unique talents who might benefit from a new kind of boost. Mr. Stan thought of you, Termite. He felt you were positioned to offer valuable insights. His lips parted slightly. A new drug? He breathed, words imbued with awe. What kind of kick does it have? Is it like Compound V, but faster, more intense? This is a new lineup of performance enhancers, I reiterated. I carefully opened the pouch to reveal a small quantity of fine powder within. It's a new formulation. It enhances sensory perception, reaction times, and mental acuity. Participate in this preliminary test, provide us with your honest feedback on the effects, and Mr. Stan has authorized me to wipe your outstanding debt clean. His eyes grew wide, darting between my masked face and the pouch of powder. You're serious? He croaked, his voice trembling with a fragile hope. No catch, no hidden clauses, just take the drug and my debt's gone. The catch, I replied, a subtle smirk hidden beneath the mask, is that we need your honest feedback on the effects. Your subjective experience is vital to our research. I pushed the pouch closer to him. The scent of the powder permeated the air, a faint metallic tang cutting through the stench of marijuana and alcohol. He leaned forward, his body trembling with feverish anticipation. He took a deep sniff of the powder. His eyes closed for a moment, savoring the experience. Whoa, he breathed out. His eyes snapped open. That's potent. I can feel the tingle already, right in my sinuses. A good tingle, you know. He looked up at me, a childlike grin spreading across his grimy face. It smells clean, not like that cheap filler and street junk. This is the real deal. He was correct. It was impeccably clean. It was a custom formulated neurotoxin designed for rapid absorption through mucous membranes. It is mixed with inert powder to mimic the appearance and texture of a narcotic. Every element was calibrated for devastating effect. A wheezing laugh escaped him. Well, for a start, my fingers feel fuzzy, he slurred, holding up his right hand. His movements were clumsy. He stared at it in bewildered wonder, his index finger twitching involuntarily, like they're buzzing, a little static charge, and the room starting to spin a little. A good spin, you know, the fun kind. This is good stuff, he mumbled, really good. Tell Stan he's got a winner here, a real goldmine. He made a clumsy attempt to get up from the couch. He stumbled, catching himself on the coffee table, sending empty beer cans rattling to the floor. Whoa, head rush, he muttered, trying to laugh it off. He looked at his hands again, rotating them slowly. He frowned. Funny thing, though, I can't really feel my hands anymore. It's like they're not even mine. That's the onset, I stated, my voice devoid of any emotion. The peripheral nervous system is a surprisingly efficient conduit for absorption. What was in that? He stammered, his voice choked with fear. His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. I watched as his body started to sway, losing its balance. He tried to take a step toward me in a desperate attempt to escape, but his legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees and ended up a broken figure on the filthy carpet. Feedback, I said, my voice chilling with the pronouncement of his fate. Phase 1 is systemic motor neuron paralysis. It should be reaching your respiratory system in about 90 seconds. You wanted to know the kick? That's the kick. His eyes widened with terror. A desperate sound tried to escape from his mouth. His diaphragm had ceased to respond to his frantic commands. Each contraction was a futile struggle against the inevitable. His face turned deep purple, and veins bulged in his neck as oxygen starved his brain. "You're a loose end, Termite," I stated, the words a cold epitaph. I drew the specter from its concealed holster. The pistol seemed unnaturally quiet in the claustrophobic room. He stared up at the barrel of the gun and begged for a mercy he could no longer articulate. His body convulsed in involuntary spasms as his brain screamed for oxygen. I pulled the trigger. The sound was barely louder than Termite's own choked gasps. A precise hole appeared in the center of his forehead. His face hit the filthy floor with a soft thud. The residual air in his lungs exhaled in a final puff. A blue screen materialized directly in my vision. Its digital light contrasted the grim tableau on the floor. Supe neutralized, plundering power, size alteration tier 4. Choose option, retain power or convert to 500 XP. I considered the choice, size alteration. It had its uses. Infiltration, espionage, escaping detection in impossible situations. Its weakness in a direct fight was obvious. Shrinking would not make me bulletproof, and growing would only make me a larger target. As a tool for an operative thriving in shadows, it was invaluable. "Retain," I replied. A strange sensation washed over my body for a split second. It felt as if every cell in my body was being mapped. Then each cell received a new instruction. It was a sensation of silent metamorphosis. Power size alteration tier 4, successfully integrated. Host can now alter physical size at will. Current range, 0.5 inches to 12 feet. Note, total mass is conserved. When reduced to minimum size, mass is compacted and remains dormant unless force is deliberately applied. Density becomes extreme only at the point of exertion, when expanded to maximum size, resulting in low density. The system's logic was clear. My mass would remain dormant while shrunken, making me weightless to the touch. But upon impact, that mass would concentrate into a single point. It was basic physics. The smaller the surface area, the more devastating the pressure. I could become a living bullet. I pushed the thought aside. Before I explore this power further, I need to clean up the crime scene. I located the entry wound, a clean hole in the back wall where the bullet had exited Termite's head. I dug the flattened round out of the plaster. Its deformation was a testament to the projectile's force. I stored it in a secure compartment in my inventory. I found Termite's own stash of drugs, a crumpled plastic bag of cheap cocaine, and placed it prominently on the coffee table. I took the empty whiskey bottle and positioned it loosely near his lifeless hand, as if he had dropped it in his final moments. As for gunshot wounds, Vought's cleanup crews would undoubtedly arrive long before any official coroner had a chance to thoroughly examine the body. They would classify it as a self-inflicted wound. It was an embarrassing death, an inconvenience that Vought and the NYPD would be happy to sweep under the rug. I performed a final sweep of the apartment. Every surface I might have touched had been protected by my gloves. The looped security footage downstairs would continue its silent replay of an empty lobby. I slipped out of the apartment, locking the door behind me with a soft click. I descended the 4 flights of stairs and emerged from the building, melting back into the anonymous shadows of forgotten corners. I reached the black sedan, its dark form a sentinel beneath the overpass. I slid into the driver's seat. The faint smell of grime and decay quickly replaced the clean scent of leather. I pulled off the neck gaiter and the gloves, folding them and storing them away in my inventory. I drove calmly back towards the glittering heart of Manhattan, back to my penthouse in the sky, where the city lights sparkled, oblivious to the quiet violence that had just transpired beneath its vast sprawl. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 8, Chapter 8, Supe Party. The penthouse door closed behind me with a soft hiss, a definitive sound that severed me from the city's grimy churn. I stood for a long moment in the marble foyer, the silence a profound absence after the violent intensity of my recent task. It was a quiet that felt both alien and strangely inviting. And the award for cleanest first kill in history goes to the new guy? The system's voice chimed in my head, a distinct current of sarcasm running beneath its tone. Seriously, impressive work, methodical, ruthless, and you tricked him into sniffing poison, 10 out of 10 for creative villainy. I'm so proud. It wasn't villainy, I replied, a quiet rebuttal forming in my mind as I walked toward the vast living area. It was a strategic asset removal. Villainy, strategic asset removal, who cares what you call it? The point is, he's dead and you've got a new toy? The system insisted, its enthusiasm now overriding its earlier jests. It buzzed with an almost childish eagerness. Come on, let's open our presents, test it out. Can you shrink your, you-know-what, never mind. Let's just see the basics first. I found my way to a section of the penthouse I hadn't yet explored, Arian Spencer's private gym. It was an enormous space, easily the size of a small basketball court, completely soundproofed, and without a single window to the outside world. Let's see what this is all about, I murmured aloud, my voice feeling small as it echoed in the empty expanse. An interface shimmered into existence in my vision, presenting my updated status. Host, Arian Spencer. Experience points XP, 0. Powers, size alteration tier 4. Inventory, 4750 grids used. Activating the power was peculiar. It began as a focused thought, a subtle resonance deep within my very cells, I picturing myself becoming smaller. The sensation was profoundly disorienting. It felt as if the entire world around me was suddenly expanding. The ceiling above me raced upward into an unreachable distance, and the walls morphing into distant horizons. I experienced an unrelenting force, pressing in from all sides, compacting my matter. It felt as though every atom within me was being packed tighter. I halted the process when I estimated myself to be about a foot tall. I looked down at my hands, now disproportionately small. When I took a step, my foot landed with a surprisingly solid thud on the mat, a sound disproportionate to my size. "Whoa, trippy," the system commented, its voice sounding a touch surprised. "You look like a doll. A very handsome, very tactical doll. Can you do a flip?" I ignored its playful suggestion and continued to shrink. The room swiftly became a landscape of giants. A discarded water bottle now loomed like a colossal skyscraper. I pushed the shrinking further, my will a determined force, until I was no more than an inch tall. The perspective was utterly alien, a world entirely recontextualized. The texture of the floor mat was now a tangled forest of synthetic fibers. I felt incredibly solid, a tiny nugget of compressed matter. "Interesting," I murmured, my voice an almost comical squeak. "Interesting, this is amazing," the system squeaked back, its excitement completely uncontained. "Think of the possibilities. You could sneak into a movie theater for free, you could explore an anthill, you could ride a pigeon." I'm thinking more along the lines of infiltrating a secure Vought facility by slipping under the door, I countered in my thoughts, my mind already racing through the practical applications. This was an S-tier power, without a doubt. I then reversed the process, focusing my will on the idea of growth. The world rushed inward, shrinking around me with dizzying speed as I expanded. The feeling was the direct opposite of before, a profound sense of lightness, as if my atoms were gently spreading apart. I shot past my normal height, the 12-foot ceiling growing uncomfortably. I stopped when my head just brushed against its hard surface. Looking down, the entire room seemed to have become a detailed model, a miniature diorama of itself. My movements at this size were noticeably slower, and my density was clearly low. While it presented a potent intimidation tactic, its direct combat applications felt limited. The true power resided in the shrinking. I returned to my normal size, the world snapping back into its familiar perspective. I now understood the power's intricate mechanics, its inherent strengths, and its distinct weaknesses. It was a tool, and like any tool, its effectiveness rested entirely in the hands of a skilled operator. With the necessary tests complete, I moved back to my command center. It was time to ascertain if my cleanup operation had been as thorough and successful as I'd hoped. I settled into my chair and brought the city's digital world to my fingertips. A single paragraph on a bottom-feeder celebrity gossip website was the only mention. The headline read, "Ant-Man, actor dead in apparent overdose." The article itself was almost disdainful. It mentioned Termite's name, his minor role in the Vought cinematic universe, and then quoted an official Vought press release. "We are saddened by the tragic passing of a former member of the Vought family," the statement began, a carefully constructed facade. He had been struggling with personal demons for some time. Our thoughts are with his family during this difficult period. The NYPD case was already closed. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest due to a polysubstance overdose. Vought's cleaners had done their job with chilling efficiency, burying my meticulous work under a thick layer of corporate PR and plausible deniability. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. The methodology was sound. I could systematically pick off low-tier subs, and as long as I operated with careful precision, Vought themselves would inadvertently assist me in covering my tracks. "See, you did them a favor," the system chirped, its tone now utterly pleased. "You took out their trash and they handled the disposal. It's a win-win." Now it's time to find a way to get stronger, my gaze fixed on the glittering cityscape. Size alteration is a fantastic tool for stealth and infiltration, but it's not a weapon. Against a truly powerful Supe, shrinking just makes me a smaller target. Retaining it was a strategic necessity to build my toolkit, but now I need raw power. I need XP to upgrade it, or to bank for a better combat ability down the line. I dove back into the digital underworld, my virtual proxies hiding my presence like ghosts in the machine. I was searching for an opportunity, a place where the vermin of the world would gather, oblivious to the predator among them. On the same dark web forums where I'd first found Termite, a low hum of activity had begun to build. The chatter revolved around an upcoming event, the Believe Expo, a massive Christian-themed superhero convention meticulously hosted by Vought. It was a clear PR stunt, a calculated move for Vought to corner the lucrative evangelical market. But I had no interest in the public-facing event. My focus was on the after-party. According to a flurry of encrypted messages, Ezekiel was hosting a debaucherous party at a luxury hotel immediately after the main expo. It was an open secret within the Supe community, a clandestine gathering for the D-listers and the eager wannabes to indulge in every conceivable vice, all under the thinly veiled guise of fellowship. It was a target-rich environment, a golden opportunity to harvest a massive amount of XP in a single night. "A Supe orgy? Oh, this is gonna be disgusting," the system commented, a hint of revulsion in its voice that was quickly overshadowed by its calculating side. "But also very, very profitable. It's like a buffet of scumbags, a scumbags board." Then let's start with the menu. I need a guest list, I thought, my mind already meticulously formulating a plan. I seamlessly hacked the catering company for the event, then slipped into the hotel's reservation system, cross-referencing names against my meticulously curated database of known subs. The list that populated on my screen was a who's who of has-beens and never-weres, a parade of mediocrity. I watched a few notable names scroll by. Ezekiel was a tier 4. But killing the leader of a Vought-sponsored hero group at his own party would undeniably guarantee an investigation with real resources behind it, a level of scrutiny I was not yet ready for. Popclaw was also on the invite list, a normal person for now. I knew she would later inject herself with Compound V. I could wait for a future opportunity, but her direct connection to A-Train made her far too risky at this stage. And speaking of A-Train, his name appeared on a list of potential attendees, a risk I was absolutely unwilling to take. Eliminating Z-listers was one thing, and antagonizing a member of the Seven was a swift path to my own demise. I was not nearly confident enough to handle that level of heat. Not yet. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 9, chapter 9, target. My fingers moved across the holographic interface, discarding the high-profile liabilities. My focus sharpened on the low-consequence assets, those whose disappearance would barely register beyond a ripple. Yet, even among the Tier 3 to Tier 5 fodder, a few larger targets emerged, promising a more substantial yield. I highlighted the primary targets with a cold gesture. Doppelganger, Tier 3. His ability to perfectly mimic others made him incredibly useful for infiltration. Ice Breather, Tier 3. A dangerous opponent in a direct confrontation, his powers chillingly effective. Ice Pick, Tier 3. He often worked in tandem with Ice Breather, a lethal pairing. Weightlifter, Tier 4. A predictable foe, a standard brick of super strength and unwavering durability. Then I counted the rest. There were 12 confirmed Tier 5 subs. Most of them had gimmicky powers or minor physical enhancements. Their abilities were unimpressive, and their ambitions were far greater than what they were actually capable of. 3 Tier 3 subs were on the list, each a valuable asset in the ecosystem of my burgeoning power. The cryokinetic abilities of Ice Breather and Ice Pick offered a potent form of elemental control. Doppelganger's shapeshifting was the ultimate infiltration tool, a perfect complement to my ghost persona. The 12 Tier 5s and the single Tier 4 were merely appetizers, valuable XP fodder to fuel my upgrades. This party was a treasure trove waiting to be plundered. The plan needed to be flawless. A frontal assault was out of the question. I needed a way to neutralize the entire party at once without a single sound. I accessed the Spencer Industries' internal R&D server, a digital labyrinth of innovation and secrets. Deep within a classified project file, I found what I was looking for, CX9. It was an advanced aerosolized anesthetic, odorless, colorless, and heavier than air. It was engineered for dispersion through a ventilation system. A high enough concentration could render a normal human unconscious in under 30 seconds. For sups with their enhanced durability, I would need to increase the dosage significantly. I sent a Priority 1 order to my own lab, bypassing the usual channels. I requested a high-yield canister of CX9 to be delivered to a secure Spencer Industries drop box in Queens. The reason cited on the requisition form was a bland detail: field testing for urban crowd control simulation. The party was slated to be held on a privately rented floor of the Gilded Lily Hotel. I hacked the hotel's network, pulling up the blueprints for the entire building. The floor plan for the party suite scrolled across my screen, followed by the detailed schematics for its independent ventilation system. I also quietly placed a digital backdoor into their security camera system, granting myself live access to every camera feed in the building. For the next 2 days, I existed as a silent observer. I watched the staff prepare the suite. I tracked Ezekiel's movements with patient precision. On the night of the party, I was ready. I donned my ghost attire once more. My loadout was simple: the Spectre pistol, the combat knife, and the pressurized canister of CX9 I had retrieved from the drop box. I drove the untraceable sedan and parked it in a multi-story garage 4 blocks from the hotel. I found a shadowed corner in the alleyway behind the hotel. I willed myself to shrink until I was no larger than a mouse. Then, I simply slipped under the door, a movement of complete anonymity. I navigated the back hallways of the hotel as a minuscule figure. To my shrunken perception, the hallways were vast canyons, and the hotel staff lumbered through their nightly duties. I moved through the deeper shadows until I reached the service elevator. I crawled inside, found a precarious perch on a narrow ledge, and rode it upward to the party floor. From my hiding spot in the ceiling vent of the main hallway, I saw infamous Billy Butcher, his face a mask of grim amusement, and a nervous-looking kid who had to be Huey Campbell. Butcher had brought Huey here to shatter his last illusions, to rub his face in the undeniable filth and hypocrisy of the sups he might once have admired. It was a masterclass in radicalization. From the raw disgust etched onto Huey's face as he watched Ezekiel's performance of fake piety, it was clearly working, a slow unraveling of his innocence. When they finally re-emerged from the main party, the disgust on Huey's face was plain to see. Their exit was a hasty retreat, a deliberate slipping away into the chaos of the crowd before anyone took too much notice. I waited until the early hours of the morning, when the party had thinned out, and most of the remaining sups had retired to the private rooms branching off the main suite, seeking their own form of excess. I navigated the labyrinthine ventilation shafts, a tiny explorer in a metal maze, until I found the main intake for the party floor. The canister of CX9 remained safely within my inventory. I found a secluded maintenance closet and returned to my normal size. I retrieved the canister, its cool metal heavy in my hand. I attached its nozzle to the vent and set a timer for a high-volume, 5-minute dispersal. Then, I shrank back down to the size of a near-invisible observer. The first to go were the few remaining partygoers in the main lounge. A woman with hands that glowed suddenly slumped forward onto the table, her head hitting the polished surface with a dull thud. A man with what looked like gills on his neck simply wilted in his chair, his body losing all tension. Within 2 minutes, the entire lounge was filled with unconscious bodies, strewn across furniture and floor alike. The high dosage worked even on the Supes. I crawled out of the vent and dropped silently onto the plush carpet below, landing with barely a whisper. "System," I said, my voice a squeak even in my own mind, a barely audible whisper. "Cue all Plunder notifications. Do not display them until I give the command. I need to focus." "Roger that, boss." Silent running, stacking up the loot boxes for later. "Good luck, and try not to get stepped on." The system's voice was a low hum of compliance. My first target was weightlifter. I found him sprawled on a king-sized bed, 2 unconscious women draped beside him. He was a mountain of a man. At my current size, his head was a fleshy continent. I began the arduous climb up the bedsheets, a journey that felt like scaling a sheer cliff face, taking almost a full minute of determined effort. I stood on his temple, drew my carbon fiber knife, and plunged it directly into his ear canal. With my super soldier strength, the force was devastating. I pushed the blade as deep as it would go, severing his brain stem from the spinal cord. It was a silent execution. I slid down the bedsheets, a controlled descent that still felt like rappelling down a perilous cliff face. My next targets were the cryokinetic duo, Ice Breather and Ice Pick. I found their room easily. A thin layer of frost coated the outside of their door, and the air in the hallway in its immediate vicinity was noticeably colder. I slipped under the door, the chill immediately seeping into my tiny form. The room was a winter wonderland of debauchery. Frost patterns spiderwebbed across the windows, creating frozen lace, and the 2 Supes were passed out on opposite beds, their breath misting faintly in the frigid air. The journey across the frozen tundra of the carpet was a careful one. I reached the first bed and began the arduous climb, the fabric stiff and cold beneath my tiny hands and feet. When I finally reached Ice Breather's head, I repeated the brutal process. I found the soft spot just behind his earlobe and drove the carbon fiber blade home with all my concentrated might. Then I scuttled across the floor, a tiny black speck against the stark white carpet, and scaled the second mountain. Ice Pick met the same anticlimactic end, an unceremonious departure. The 2 most powerful active threats in the party were eliminated, as easily as the first, their powers now dormant forever. Next, I found Doppelganger alone, his face peaceful, a serene expression unsuited to his impending fate. I climbed his pant leg, navigated the expansive terrain of his shirt, and delivered the same fatal stab, a final end to his mimicry. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 10, Chapter 10, Night of Massacre. It became an almost hypnotic process, a grimly perfected ritual of efficiency. I moved from room to room, a tiny angel of death navigating a den of sleeping sinners. The world was a series of overwhelming landscapes. Plush carpets became overgrown fields I had to painstakingly navigate, their fibers rising like giant blades of grass. Spilled drinks transformed into treacherous lakes. A discarded high heel shoe was an abandoned sculpture. For each target, the method was a silent perfected ritual. Identify, approach, climb, kill. I entered a room that reeked of stale sweat, a cloying scent that permeated the very air. He was a Supe whose name was Slipstream. His power, hypersecretion. Yes, he lived up to the name in the worst possible way, now passed out in a literal puddle of his own greasy perspiration. The climb up his bedsheet was a disgusting affair, each tiny movement a struggle against the slick fabric. The final strike felt less like an execution and more like a small act of sanitation. The next room was a stark contrast lit by a flickering light from a bedside lamp. A woman lay on the floor, her skin shifting through a nauseating rainbow of colors even in her unconscious state. It was a pathetic power, designed for nothing more than being a living disco ball, a fleeting visual distraction. Her death was less an execution and more like switching off a faulty lamp, its garish glow finally extinguished. I moved on, a man I recognized from the files as Arm Falloff Boy. The sheer absurdity of his Supe name was the only thing that threatened to break my unyielding focus. He was asleep on the floor, one of his arms detached and lying beside him like a discarded toy. The bizarre sight almost made me pause. I dispatched him with the same silent brutality and moved to the next room, leaving his severed limb where it lay, a morbid testament to his ridiculous ability. Each life ended with the same quiet finality. There were no epic battles, no dramatic last words, no sudden cries for help. Just the almost imperceptible sound of a tiny blade finding its mark in the most vulnerable part of the human brain. I was an exterminator moving through an infested house, a surgeon exorcising cancer, cell by cell, with chilling precision. The work continued, a silent ballet of death performed on a miniature scale. The woman who could talk to insects, now voiceless. The man who could perfectly peel a banana with his mind, his unique talent now irrelevant. The twin brothers whose only power was to know what the other was thinking, their shared consciousness extinguished simultaneously. They all died the same way, their last moments peaceful and unaware. The harvest was complete, achieved in absolute silence. I retreated to the main lounge, the scene of the initial gassing, and retrieved the now empty CX-9 canister from the vent opening, tucking it away. The air was still heavy with the sickly sweet scent of the anesthetic, but my own head remained perfectly clear, shielded by the compact filter mask sealed over my nose and mouth. Remaining the size of a mouse, I navigated the vast landscape of the carpet, a tiny shadow in a room filled with motionless giants. The journey to the suite's main door was an expedition across a textile desert, each fiber a formidable obstacle. I reached the door and slipped through the infinitesimal gap underneath, emerging into the empty hallway. A few minutes later, the elevator doors down the hall opened with a soft chime, and a pair of hotel staffers stepped out, their voices hushed in the quiet hours. As the doors began to slide shut, I scurried across the floor and slipped through the closing gap, my tiny form going completely unnoticed. In the opulent lobby, a lone cleaner was methodically polishing the marble floors, and a night clerk dozed behind the front desk. Crossing the wide expanse of polished marble was the most dangerous part of my exit. I stayed close to the shadowed wall, a darting speck of darkness against the reflective surface, before finally slipping under the main revolving door and out into the pre-dawn chill of the New York City air. The sky was beginning to fade from the inky black of night to a deep, and the city's perpetual hum was slowly starting to rise in volume, a low thrum that promised a new day. The 4-block journey to the car was a high-stakes obstacle course for my shrunken form. Cracks in the pavement became treacherous canyons I had to navigate. A discarded plastic bag was a rustling monster, threatening to engulf me. I was an unseen observer, a ghost in the truest sense, traversing a world that was utterly oblivious to my existence. I finally reached the parking garage, its concrete structure a looming cavern. The car was exactly where I had left it, a dark mountain of steel. I crawled up the rough texture of the tire, found the minute seal at the bottom of the driver's side door, and squeezed my tiny body through the rubber gasket into the car's interior. Inside the leather-scented sanctuary of the sedan, I finally allowed myself to return to my proper size. With a silent shimmer my body filling the driver's seat as the world contracted around me. I pulled off the filter mask and gloves, storing them away in my inventory, their work done. I finally allowed myself a moment to process the weight of the night, an unfeeling tally of 16 kills. The drive back to the penthouse was quiet, the only sound was the hum of the engine. The skyline of Manhattan grew closer, a forest of glittering steel and glass that represented the pinnacle of human achievement and human arrogance. My building stood among them, my own personal fortress in the sky. The private garage opened silently for my car. The security systems recognized me without an alert. I took the private elevator directly to the penthouse, a silent transition from the chaos of the outside world to the absolute control and solitude of my domain. The soft hiss of the penthouse door closing behind me was a sound of ultimate security. I walked straight to my office and sank into the cool leather of the chair behind the obsidian desk. The multiple monitors awoke at my presence, bathing the room in an ethereal light, bringing the digital world to life. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the hacking mastery turning complex code into an intuitive language, a natural extension of my will. I had a precise log of my route to and from the hotel. I accessed the archives for a dozen different cameras along the way. With surgical precision, I carefully edited my untraceable sedan out of existence. For a few imperceptible frames in each video, my car was simply not there, the algorithm seamlessly blending the background to fill the empty space, leaving no trace. I slipped back into the hotel security system through the digital backdoor I had left open. Finding the footage from the lobby, the service corridors, and the elevator was simple. I painstakingly scanned the videos from the time of my arrival. My tiny form was almost impossible to see, a mere flicker in the shadows. But almost wasn't good enough. I scrubbed my presence from every single frame. The camera in the main hallway was still running its 5-minute loop, a repeating segment. That would be my alibi for the entire floor. I downloaded that repeating segment of footage. Then, I accessed the server's core logs. I found the exact moment my gas canister was set to go off. I overwrote the next several hours of footage from the hallway camera with the clean loop. From the moment the gas was released until well after I had left, the official record would show an empty hallway. The massacre in the rooms, next door, had never officially occurred. I closed the back door I had created, deleted the access logs that recorded my intrusion, and even wiped the router's short-term memory, leaving no digital breadcrumbs. As far as the hotel's IT department would ever know, their system had experienced a minor glitch for a few hours. Only when every digital trace had been swept away did I lean back, the tension finally leaving my shoulders. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 11, chapter 11, harvest. System, I said, my normal voice a thunderous boom after an hour of silence. Report. The interface in my vision lit up like a Christmas tree, a long list of notifications that had been queued up. Plunder queue, processing. Supe neutralized, weightlifter tier 4. Power, super strength, super defense. Choose option, retain or convert. Retain. Power's super strength tier 4 and super defense tier 4 successfully integrated. A sudden pressure surged through my muscles. My bones felt more sturdier, as if reinforced from the inside. Supe neutralized, ice breather tier 3. Power, cryokinetic breathing, ice generation, cold immunity regeneration. Choose option, retain or convert. Retain. Power's cryokinetic breathing tier 3, ice generation tier 3, cold immunity tier 3, and regeneration tier 3 successfully integrated. A deep chill settled into my bones, a feeling that was immediately neutralized by a comfortable warmth. My body now understood cold on a fundamental level. Supe neutralized, ice pick tier 3. Power, ice manipulation and generation, extreme freezing, organic ice form, cold immunity. Choose option, retain or convert. Retain all new powers. Convert any duplicates into XP. Powers ice manipulation and generation tier 3, extreme freezing tier 3, and organic ice form tier 3, successfully integrated. Duplicate power detected, cold immunity tier 3, converting to experience points. Conversion complete, you have gained 1500 XP. Just as the notification cleared, a new message popped up. Synergy alert, multiple related powers from the Cryo family have been detected. Do you wish to merge the following abilities? Cryokinetic breathing, tier 3. Ice generation, tier 3. Ice manipulation and generation, tier 3. Extreme freezing, tier 3. Organic ice form, tier 3. Merging will consume all listed powers and create a superior composite ability. Cryokinesis, tier 1. As a bonus for achieving a natural tier 1 ability through synergy, you will receive a 2500 XP reward. Do you wish to proceed? I stared at the message, a slow grin spreading across my face. A tier 1 power, my first true god tier ability, and it came with a massive XP bonus. Yes, I said, the word filled with triumphant certainty. Merge them. Merging, please wait. An intense cold flared in my chest. It spread through my veins like liquid nitrogen before vanishing completely, leaving behind a profound understanding. I could feel the trace amounts of moisture in the air, the water in the pipes of the building, the ice in my freezer. They were all extensions of my will. Merge complete. You have acquired Cryokinesis Tier 1. Synergy bonus awarded, plus 2500 XP. Supe neutralized, Doppelganger Tier 3. Power, shapeshifting includes voice replication and mimicry. Choose option, retain or convert. Retain. Power shapeshifting Tier 3, successfully integrated. A bizarre sensation washed over, as if my cells were momentarily forgetting what shape they were supposed to be in before snapping back into place. The list continued, a rapid-fire tally of the Tier 5 fodder. Supe neutralized, Slipstream Tier 5, Power hypersecretion, convert. Convert. Plus 100 XP. Supe neutralized, Chroma Tier 5, Power chromatophore skin, convert. Convert. Plus 100 XP. Supe neutralized, Arm Fall Off Boy Tier 5. Convert. Plus 100 XP. And on, it went for the remaining 9 Tier 5 subs, each one adding a neat 100 XP to my growing total. By the time the queue was finished, the final tally materialized on my screen. Harvest complete. Final XP tally. Cold immunity conversion, 1500 XP. Synergy bonus, 2500 XP. 12 X Tier 5 conversions, 1200 XP. Total XP GAINED, 5200 XP. Current XP, 5200. Current powers. Cryokinesis Tier 1. Regeneration Tier 3. Shapeshifting Tier 3. Size alteration Tier 4. Super Strength Tier 4. Super Defense Tier 4. I stared at the screen. In one single executed operation, I had gone from a man with one gimmicky power to a legitimate Tier 1 threat, with a versatile arsenal of abilities and a massive bank of XP ready for upgrades. Holy crap! The system's voice was filled with genuine awe. You robbed the bank and walked away with the entire mint. That was efficient. It was a good night's work, I agreed, a feeling of absolute satisfaction settling in. System, I said, my voice calm. Initiate upgrade interface. Right away, boss. Time to spend those hard-earned points. What are we improving first? The super shrinking, super punching, or are you finally going to invest in that shark tank? Regeneration, I ordered. The screen changed, focusing on the power I had selected. Power selected, Regeneration Tier 3. Upgrade to Tier 2 requires 3000 XP. Current XP, 5200. Do you wish to proceed? Confirm, I ordered. Deducting 3000 XP, upgrade in progress. A warm sensation spread through my entire body, starting from my core and radiating outwards. It was a pleasant feeling, like sinking into a hot bath. I felt my cells vibrating, my DNA being rewritten with a more potent set of instructions for self-repair. It was over in a matter of seconds. Upgrade complete. Regeneration is now Tier 2. Recovery from injuries is now drastically accelerated. Can now perform full limb regeneration. As long as the brain is intact, any part of the body can be regrown. Current XP, 2200. My body felt more alive. The passive healing from the Super Soldier Serum was a slow trickle. This was a roaring river, ready to be unleashed at a moment's notice. Next, I said, already moving on, size alteration. Power selected, size alteration Tier 4. Upgrading to Tier 3 requires 1500 XP. Current XP, 2200. Do you wish to proceed? Confirm. Deducting 1500 XP, upgrade in progress. This sensation felt like my physical form was becoming more malleable, more conceptually fluid. The hard limits of my previous size range seemed to soften and expand. Upgrade complete. Size alteration is now Tier 3. Size range has been expanded. New range, 0.1 inches to 25 feet. Control and transition speed have been significantly improved. Current XP, 700. I tested it immediately, shrinking down to the size of a fly in less than a second. I had better control, and the whole process felt smoother. I could feel the individual air currents in the room. This was becoming a truly powerful infiltration and evasion ability. I returned to my normal size and looked at my remaining XP. 700. It wasn't enough to upgrade any of my other powers. I leaned back in my chair. The night's work had been a resounding success. I had acquired a Tier 1 elemental power, a versatile shapeshifting ability, enhanced strength and durability, and had already upgraded my regeneration and size shifting. The power gap between me and the top-tier Sups was still a vast chasm, but I could see the other side, and I was building the bridge to cross it, one dead Supe at a time. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 12, Chapter 12, Vought Agents. The first scream of the morning at the Gilded Lily Hotel came from a girl named Chloe, a part-time model who had woken up with a splitting headache and the coppery taste of last night's bad decisions in her mouth. The man beside her, a D-list Supe whose name she couldn't remember but whose power involved something to do with extra joints in his fingers, was completely still. That wasn't unusual. Most of the men she ended up with after parties like this were heavy sleepers. But this felt different. The skin where her hand rested on his bare shoulder was cold. Not just cool from the hotel's aggressive air conditioning, but waxy and unnaturally cold. "Hey," she said, her voice a rough croak. She nudged him. "Wake up, I gotta go." There was no response. His eyes were closed, and he looked peaceful, like a marble statue in the dim morning light filtering through the blackout curtains. A prickle of unease cut through her hangover. She sat up, the cheap silk sheet pooling around her waist. She looked closer. His chest wasn't moving. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, fumbling for a pulse. There was nothing. The scream that ripped from her throat was pure terror. It was a sound that shattered the morning after a haze of the entire floor. Doors creaked open. Hungover faces peered out into the hallway. "What the hell was that?" someone grumbled. Chloe stumbled out of her room, clutching the sheet to her body, her face pale and streaked with mascara. "He's dead," she shrieked, pointing back into the room. "He's not breathing, he's dead." Her panic was a virus. A man from the room across the hall, a low-level Supe with some kind of minor regeneration, went to check on the woman he'd spent the night with. He found her dead as well. Another scream, this one more deeper. The chaos spread like a shockwave. As the surviving humans and the few Sups who had slept alone woke up, they also discovered someone dead beside them. In the main lounge, bodies were slumped in chairs and on couches. They looked like they had simply fallen asleep mid-conversation. In the private rooms, they were found in their beds. All of them were Sups, and all of them were dead. The scene was surreal. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle, no broken furniture, no bullet holes in the walls, and no damage to their bodies. They looked like they had all decided to collectively hold their breath until their hearts stopped. It formed a peaceful, baffling tableau of death. Within minutes, the entire floor was a madhouse of screaming, crying, and panicked phone calls. The illusion of the debaucherous party had been shattered, replaced by the cold reality of a mass grave in a luxury hotel. The first on the scene were 2 NYPD detectives, a grizzled veteran named Miller and perpetually tired-looking partner, Detective Chen. They had been expecting a standard overdose, maybe a domestic dispute gone wrong. They were not prepared for this. 16 bodies, Miller breathed, his eyes wide as he took in the scene in the main lounge. 16, all of them Sups. "And not a mark on them," Chen added, his voice low. He was kneeling beside the body of a woman whose skin was still faintly shifting colors. They look like they're sleeping. No foam at the mouth, no signs of seizure, no needles, and no obvious drug paraphernalia beyond the usual party crap. The hotel manager was babbling in the corner, his face the color of ash. The surviving partygoers were being herded into a separate conference room by uniformed officers, their panicked statements a contradictory mess of drugs, alcohol, and hazy memories. Miller ran a hand over his weary face. This was already a nightmare, and it was about to get worse. "Get the ME team up here, stat. I want a full talk screen on every single one of them, and for God's sake, keep the press out of the lobby. The last thing we need is..." He was cut off by the sound of the elevator dinging. The doors slid open, and 4 individuals stepped out. They were all dressed in dark business suits. They moved with an unnerving confidence, their eyes sweeping over the scene with the detached appraisal of an exterminator surveying an infestation. A sharp-featured individual with cold, gray eyes approached Miller. He flashed a Vought corporate security badge. "Detective Miller, I'm Mr. Graves, Vought Risk Assessment. This is now a Vought-managed incident." Miller bristled. "This is a crime scene, Mr. Graves, a multiple homicide. It's NYPD jurisdiction." Graves gave a pitying smile. "With all due respect, Detective, these are Vought assets. This is a catastrophic loss of corporate property. As per our standing agreement with the city, our internal teams will be taking the lead on the investigation. Your department will receive a full and comprehensive report once our assessment is complete. For now, I need you and your officers to secure the perimeter and handle crowd control. We'll take it from here." Chen looked at Miller, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Miller stared at Graves for a long moment, a silent battle of wills taking place in the chaotic hallway. Finally, the detective's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew how this worked. Vought was a force of nature in the city. "Fine," Miller grumbled, turning to his partner. "Chen, let's go talk to the witnesses. Let the suits play with their dead toys." As the NYPD was politely escorted off the floor, Graves' team went to work with a chilling efficiency. They were a corporate recovery team assessing a disaster. They unpacked cases filled with advanced equipment. "Forensics on every body," Graves ordered, his voice a calm command. "I want a full biological and chemical workup. Check for toxins, poisons, airborne agents, everything. I want to know what they had for breakfast yesterday." Another agent was already at the hotel's security office. "Sir, we have a problem with the camera footage from this floor." "A problem?" Graves asked, not looking up from his datapad. "The footage from the main hallway camera is on a perfect 5-minute loop. It starts at 1:32 a.m. and continues until the first 911 call. The splices are almost seamless. Whoever did this is a high-level specialist." Graves' expression tightened. "The doors." "No signs of forced entry on any of the rooms," another agent reported. "The electronic locks show no signs of tampering. They were either opened with a key card or the perpetrator never used the door at all." A few minutes later, a stern woman named Dr. Evans called Graves over to the body of weightlifter. She was examining his head with a high-resolution microscopic scanner. "I think I found something," she said, pointing to an almost invisible mark in his ear canal. "It's a puncture wound, less than a millimeter in diameter. It goes straight through the eardrum and directly into the brain stem." Graves leaned in, his gray eyes narrowing. "Cause of death?" "Instantaneous," Dr. Evans said. "It was a precise strike that severed the connection between the brain and the body. He was dead before he even realized he'd been attacked. I'm running scans on the others, and I expect to find the same mark on all of them. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 13, chapter 13, Z-Drug." Graves stood up straight, a deep chill settling over him despite his calm exterior. A specialist who could bypass all security. An infiltrator who didn't need to use doors. A killer who could deliver a perfectly microscopic death blow to 16 different sups without waking a single person. "Get me a sample from the ventilation system," he ordered, "and run full airborne particulate tests in every room." The results were even more frustrating. "The air is clean, sir," the agent reported, his expression a mix of bafflement and genuine nerves. "Completely clean. We ran it through every chemical and biological filter in the kit. Aside from the expected traces of cocaine, marijuana, and alcohol, we found nothing. No unknown compounds, no foreign residue. It's either a substance we've never seen, or what?" Graves' jaw tightened. "A gas that dissipated completely within hours. That was bleeding-edge engineering, the kind of thing Vought's R&D labs might produce. But the alternative was even more chilling." "Are you telling me," Graves said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low vibration, "that there's a possibility no chemical agent was used at all?" The agent hesitated, shifting his weight. "Sir, it's the only conclusion that fits the data. 16 sups, all rendered unconscious simultaneously without a sound and without leaving a single molecule behind. It's as if someone just told them all to go to sleep. The implication hung heavy in the air. A soup with the power to instantly and silently neutralize an entire room full of other sups. Or, Graves said, his voice a low murmur, his mind racing through even darker possibilities, it's not a single soup. The agent looked at him. Sir. This level of sophistication, Graves continued, gesturing to the pristine crime scene, the looped cameras and the traceless agent, this required coordination and serious resources. It was a planned operation. He leaned in, his eyes tracking the positions where the bodies had fallen. Look at the timing. Every soup dropped in the same breath. That's a tactical strike by a unit that's trained together for years. We're looking at a specialized team of sups executing a high-stakes playbook. The word hung in the air, colder than any of the bodies in the room. An operation implied an organization, a group with the funding, the technology, and the personnel to carry out a flawless Black Ops hit against Vought on their own turf. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Get me Ms. Madeline, now. The emergency board meeting at Vought Tower was convened in a state of controlled panic. Madeline sat at the head of the long table, her expression a mask of cold fury. Ashley was pacing nervously by the window, her knuckles white as she clutched her tablet. Mr. Graves stood before them, delivering his report with the detached calm of a man reporting on quarterly earnings. In summary, he concluded, 16 of our assets have been neutralized by what we can only assume is an unknown hostile organization. The perpetrators demonstrated an extremely high level of skill in digital infiltration and wet work. The murder weapon was a microscopic projectile, or blade, delivered with surgical precision to the brain stem of each victim. The victims were rendered unconscious simultaneously, without a struggle. However, we have found no trace of any chemical or biological agent. The method of incapacitation is currently unknown, but the leading theories are either a highly advanced sonic device or, more likely, a powerful telepath. We have no leads and no clear motive beyond a direct message to Vought. No leads, Madeline's voice was dangerously quiet. 16 of our properties are gone, and you have no leads. What about the survivors? Their memories of the night are a wash of drugs and alcohol, Graves replied. As far as they're concerned, their friends just died in their sleep. Ashley finally stopped pacing. The media is having a field day. We've managed to keep them out of the hotel, but the story is out. Mass death at Believe Expo after party. They're already connecting Ezekiel to it. Every headline is a brand-destroying nightmare. What's the current narrative? Madeline asked, her eyes fixed on Ashley. We're pushing a tragic overdose story, Ashley said, her voice trembling slightly. But it's not holding. 16 overdoses at once, all of them sups with enhanced durability. No one is buying it. The speculation is running wild. Gas leak, terrorist attack, a soup-killing virus. We need to control the narrative, Madeline said, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. We need a story that is believable and makes us look like we're in control. Food poisoning, one of the other executives offered weakly. Too easy to disprove, Madeline snapped. The hotel's kitchens are clean, we've already checked. A gas leak from the hotel systems. Also easily disproven. The hotel is already running its own diagnostics to cover its ass, Graves interjected. There was a tense silence in the room as the executives racked their brains. Ashley was scrolling frantically through the live news feeds on her tablet. Then an idea took shape in her mind, born from desperation and PR cynicism. What if it was a new drug? She said, thinking aloud. Something designed specifically to target sups. Something that bypasses their enhanced biology. Madeline looked at her. Go on. We call it Z-drug or something equally ominous, Ashley elaborated, her confidence growing. It's a new designer drug hitting the streets. These 16 sups were tragic figures who experimented with a new high and paid the ultimate price. It was the fault of the shadowy new drug dealers preying on the soup community. We can launch a new campaign, Ashley continued, her voice filled with a manic energy. A Vought-sponsored task force to combat the Z-drug menace. We'll have Homelander do a PSA. Say no to Z. We can turn this tragedy into a marketing opportunity. We can make ourselves the heroes of the story. Madeline leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. It was perfect and completely ruthless. Do it, she ordered. Get the marketing team on it. I want a full press release and a media strategy on my desk within the hour. Mr. Graves, your team will now shift its focus. You are gathering evidence on the Z drug cartel. Find me a low-level pusher we can pin this on. Understood. Understood, Ms. Madeline, Graves said with a nod, his face betraying no emotion. Zach. From the silent darkness of my command center, I watched it all unfold. I had a live feed from the hacked Vought conference room. On another screen, a dozen news channels were all running the same breaking news banner: the Z drug crisis, a new threat to superheroes. Look at that, they're doing your work for you, the system commented, its voice filled with amusement. You've given them a whole new marketing campaign. You should ask for a cut of the profits. I'll send them an invoice later, I quipped, taking a slow sip of my morning coffee. The dark liquid was a stark contrast to the frantic chaos I was observing on the monitor. Right now, I'm happy to let them chase their own tails. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 14, Chapter 14, The Boys. The weeks following the Believe Expo massacre were a masterclass in corporate propaganda. Vought sculpted it from raw fear and public fascination. The Z-drug crisis, as they had christened it, was a work of cynical genius. It was the perfect invisible enemy, a shadowy cartel of supervillains cooking up a soup-killing poison in a secret lab somewhere. It was terrifying, it was vague, and it was completely fabricated. From the sterile comfort of my command center, I watched it all play in glorious high definition. I saw focus groups reacting to mock-ups of the Z-drug logo. I saw Vought's marketing department be testing different taglines for their new anti-drug campaign. And I saw the crown jewel of their strategy. Homelander, floating in front of an American flag, his expression a perfect blend of paternal concern and divine disappointment. There's a new poison on our streets, he said, his voice echoing with synthetic sincerity. A cowardly weapon designed to attack us, to attack the very heroes who keep you safe. But I want to promise you this. We will hunt down these merchants of death, and we will bring them to justice. The public ate it up with a spoon. Vought's stock soared to an all-time high. They had successfully turned their greatest security failure into their most profitable marketing campaign. You gotta hand it to them, they're good. The system's voice commented as I watched the PSA for the 10th time. Turning a mass murder into a PR win? That's a Tier 1 corporate power right there. You really should have asked for a cut. Their success is my success, I replied, leaning back in my chair. The more they chase this Z-drug phantom, the less they're looking for me. Their circus provides the perfect cover for my work. My days were spent in the private gym, mastering the feel of my new abilities. Cryokinesis was about controlling energy, about understanding thermodynamics on an instinctual level. I learned to flash freeze a thrown projectile, to create razor-sharp sculptures of ice from the moisture, and to coat my own skin in a near-impenetrable layer of organic ice armor. My shapeshifting was an infinitely potent tool. I spent hours in front of a full-length mirror in the training room, practicing its nuances. I would pull up photos and videos of random people from the internet, news anchors, actors, politicians, ordinary people in street interviews, and focus on replicating them. I felt a liquid sensation as my bones shortened or lengthened, my facial structure reforming, my vocal cords tightening or loosening to match a new voice. At first, the results were crude, like a wax sculpture left too close to a fire. But with each transformation, my control became more precise. I learned to mimic their posture, their common mannerisms, and the exact cadence of their speech. I was becoming a perfect mimic, a living ghost capable of wearing any face I chose. My new primary interest was an abandoned warehouse down by the docks, a place I had located by tracking Billy Butcher's known associates. Using my size alteration power, I had slipped inside days ago and planted a series of microscopic listening devices and cameras. From there, I had hacked their phones, their laptops, and every digital account they owned. Butcher, Frenchie, and their new recruit, Huey Campbell. They were a surprisingly effective little crew. They were a wrench in Vought's finely tuned machine and that made them a potential asset or a potential liability. I hadn't decided which yet. "I'm voting liability," the system chimed in. "These guys are amateurs. They rely on brute force and righteous anger. Your work is surgical, while theirs is more like a sledgehammer, a very loud, very messy sledgehammer." "Their methods are crude," I agreed, my eyes glued to the live feed. "But their results are interesting." I watched the events unfold from the comfort of my penthouse. I saw Frenchie explaining the weakness of Translucent's carbon metamaterial skin. I saw their desperate attempts to find a way to kill him, their frustration mounting with each failed idea. I saw them stuff C4 up his ass. Translucent's invisibility, granted by his carbon skin, was a strong option for many of my future operations. What could be more valuable than the power to become truly invisible? It was the perfect complement to my size alteration, a massive upgrade to my stealth capabilities. And Butcher's crew was doing all the hard work of capturing and containing him for me. Butcher's plan was clear. He wanted to blood Huey, to force the kid to cross that final line and become a killer like him. If Huey killed Translucent, he would be bound to Butcher's crusade forever. And my plan was simple. Let them do the hard part while I stayed invisible and patient. Wait for the right moment, intercept the kill, and take the power for myself. Then disappear, leaving them to deal with the messy aftermath. A few days later, the camera I'd hacked inside Vought Tower caught something interesting. Translucent was absent from another meeting. Homelander went straight to the security room and ordered the staff to locate him using the tracker implanted in his body. After getting the location, Homelander flew straight toward their base, following the signal. He began searching the surrounding area. Inside the hideout, Butcher and Frenchie heard the loud crack of a sonic boom. When they checked the cameras and saw Homelander nearby, they panicked. They quickly made a plan. Butcher and Frenchie would go outside to distract Homelander before his search inevitably led back to them. They left Huey behind to guard the cage and keep an eye on Translucent. Taking advantage of the distraction, I parked my untraceable sedan a few blocks from their base. Then, in the quiet solitude of the car, I shrank. I slipped out through the door seal. I was an almost invisible speck on the grimy sidewalk. I dodged the heavy footsteps of pedestrians, crossed the jagged cracks in the pavement, and finally reached the front door of Gitmo on the cheap, as Butcher so eloquently called it. I slid under the door and began the long descent into the basement. I found a perch in the shadows behind a stack of discarded computer monitors, with a clear view of everything. There was a crude but effective cage. Inside it was translucent, naked, and almost invisible. And there, sitting on a rickety chair, was Huey Campbell. He looked pale, his hands shaking as he stared at the red button on the detonator resting on the table in front of him. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 15, chapter 15, translucent. You're really thinking about it, Translucent said from inside the cage, his voice low and steady as his body faded back into view. That's the problem with people like you. You hesitate. Huey said nothing. His eyes stayed fixed on the button. Let's be clear, Translucent continued. If you kill me, this doesn't end here. Vought doesn't forget. They don't forgive. A faint smile crept into his voice. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Every stranger, every shadow. Huey's grip tightened. They'll find you, Translucent said calmly. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they always do. And when they do, it won't just be you. Everyone you care about becomes leveraged. Wow, he finally dropped the mask, the system commented. Fear works better when the audience believes it. You can still walk away, Translucent pressed. Let me out and this ends. You get to go back to your quiet life. Press that button, though, a pause. That's a lifetime of running, and it won't be a long one. Huey looked up, his eyes caught in a storm of fear and doubt. Robin flashed through his mind, but layered over it was the man in the cage, promising consequences. Huey stood frozen between rage and terror, pulled apart by the choice in front of him. This was my moment. I started moving, a tiny black speck crawling silently across the dusty concrete floor. Huey was so lost in his own personal hell that he would never have noticed me even if I were full-sized. I reached the leg of his chair and began the long climb up. His jeans felt like a denim mountain. I crawled upwards, my dense form giving me a solid grip. I reached his shoulder, then moved carefully and silently along his collar until I settled at the back of his neck, completely hidden by his hair. Huey's hand was hovering over the detonator. He was about to make his choice. My combat mastery provided me with an encyclopedic knowledge of human anatomy. I knew every nerve cluster, every pressure point. I shifted my weight, raised my tiny fist, and brought it down with all my concentrated force on the precise nerve bundle at the base of his skull. The effect was instantaneous. Huey's eyes rolled back in his head, and he slumped forward, his body going completely limp. He collapsed unconscious off the chair and onto the floor. Inside the cage, Translucent stared as Huey collapsed, his jaw tightening in confusion. He called out, "Hey." I dropped from Huey's collar onto the table, landing with a soft tap. The detonator sat directly in front of me. I climbed onto the button and positioned myself over it. I braced my feet and pushed down with everything I had. For something my size, it should have been impossible. But I was still a full-grown man's weight and strength, compressed into something no bigger than a thumbnail. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, the world turned into a concussive flash. The C4, shoved deep inside his ass, detonated. His indestructible carbon skin, which could repel a .50 caliber bullet from the outside, offered zero protection from an explosion originating from within. The sound was a sickening thump that vibrated through the concrete floor and up into my very bones. The Faraday cage flashed for a moment with a silhouette of a man instantly and violently turning himself inside out. Translucent's diamond-hard skin, the very thing that made him invulnerable, now became the ultimate shrapnel. The explosion turned him inside out. A thick spray of blood, organs, and viscera erupted from the cage, painting the walls, the ceiling, and the unconscious form of Huey Campbell in a grotesque masterpiece of crimson. I had been blown back by the shockwave, my tiny form tumbling through the air like a piece of gravel. I landed in a rapidly spreading pool of warm blood. The stench was overwhelming, the sight was horrific, and the system's notification was beautiful. Supe neutralized, plundering power, carbon skin tier 3. Choose option, retain or convert. Retain. The sensation was unlike any I had felt before. It was a change on a molecular level. I felt my skin shift. It was like every cell was locking into place, forming an interlocking structure. An almost invisible shimmer passed over my body. I felt indestructible. I crawled out of the blood, my tiny form surprisingly clean, and made my way over to Huey's unconscious body. He was covered in filth, but he was breathing steadily. I located the detonator where it had been blown off the table near the cage. I lifted it carefully, keeping it from scraping the floor, and carried it back inch by inch. I placed it directly into Huey's outstretched hand, adjusting his fingers around it just enough to look natural. The scene was now perfectly set. When Huey woke up, covered in the remains of the man he was supposed to be guarding, the detonator would be right beside him. His last memory would be of his intense moral conflict, of his hand hovering over the button. He would think he had done it. He would think that in a moment of grief-fueled rage, he had blacked out and pushed the button. He would believe he was a killer. I took one last look at the boy who was about to wake up to a nightmare of his own making, and then I turned and scurried back into the shadows. I slipped out of the basement, up the stairs, and under the front door, leaving the electronics store and its bloody secret behind me. Back in the car, I returned to my normal size, the feeling of my diamond-hard skin a comforting presence. Well, that was messy, the system's voice finally piped up, its tone a mixture of shock and admiration. I have to say, your previous work was much more elegant. This was just visceral, but effective, very effective. With a smile, I started the engine and pulled out into the street, driving calmly back toward my penthouse. On the interface in my vision, my status had updated. Current powers: Cryokinesis Tier 1, Regeneration Tier 2, Carbon Skin Tier 3, Shapeshifting Tier 3, Size Alteration Tier 3, Super Strength Tier 4, Super Defense Tier 4. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 16, Chapter 16, Aftermath. The first thing Huey Campbell was aware of was the smell. It was a physical weight pressing down on him, a metallic stench so thick and overwhelming it coated the back of his throat like oil. The second sensation was the throbbing ache behind his eyes, a rhythmic pounding that synced with the frantic beat of his heart. His entire body felt like a badly tuned engine, vibrating with a nauseous hum of shock. He pushed himself up, his hands slipping on something wet and sticky. He blinked, trying to clear the fog from his vision. The dim light of the warehouse basement slowly resolved into a scene from a slaughterhouse. Blood was everywhere. It was sprayed across the concrete walls in high-velocity arterial patterns. It dripped from the ceiling pipes in slow drops that landed with a wet plip sound. It pooled on the floor in a dark lake. And he was in the middle of it. His clothes were sticking to his skin. His hands, his face, his hair, everything was slick with the gore of a man he had been guarding just a few hours ago. He scrambled backwards, crab-walking away from the epicenter of the carnage, his heels scraping against the filthy floor. His breath came in ragged, hysterical sobs that burned his lungs. Oh God, oh God, oh God. His eyes dropped to his hands. They were stained a deep crimson. Resting in his palm, his fingers curled around it almost instinctively, was the detonator. The red button sat beneath his thumb. His mind was a black hole. He tried to reach back, to find the moment it happened, but there was nothing. He remembered the fear closing in on him like a vice. He remembered Translucent's voice. He remembered his own hand shaking uncontrollably, his thumb hovering over the button. And then the nothing. The gap in his memory terrified him more than the blood. His thoughts scrambled to fill it, to make sense of the silence. And the conclusion his panicked mind reached was simple. He had done it. He must have blacked out. Overwhelmed by the grief of Robin's death, the terror of the moment, and the sheer pressure of the situation, he snapped. Somewhere in that storm of emotion, he had pressed the button. He had killed a man. Whatever Translucent was, whatever he'd threatened, Huey could only see one thing now, a life ended by his hand. His legs gave out completely, and he folded onto the filthy floor, curling in on himself as the smell of blood and death filled the room. Damn. From my command center, watching the microscopic camera feed, the scene was pathetic. The audio picked up every one of Huey's choked sobs. "Kid's gonna need therapy," the system's voice commented, its usual cheerfulness tinged with a hint of something that might have been pity, and a fire hose, and probably a new everything. "I don't think you can get those stains out." "He'll be fine," I said, my voice devoid of emotion as I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Butcher will make sure of it." Damn. As if summoned by the mention of his name, the sound of a heavy door opening echoed from the floor above. Heavy footsteps descended the stairs. Billy Butcher and Frenchie appeared in the doorway, their faces grim. They stopped dead at the bottom of the stairs, taking in the room. Their expressions were a mixture of shock and disgust, but in Butcher's case, there was a flicker of something else. Something that looked disturbingly like pride. "Well, F***K me," Butcher breathed, a slow grin spreading across his face as he surveyed the carnage. "Look what the cat dragged in. Or, blew up." Frenchie moved first, his pragmatic habits taking over despite the mess. He crouched near the remains, scanning the damage with a sharp eye. "Yeah," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "That is the charge, exactly how it should look." He exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. Nothing went wrong. Their attention finally turned to the sobbing figure on the floor. Butcher walked over, his boots splashing softly in the fluids, and nudged Huey. "Oi, look at me. Are you still breathing?" Huey looked up, his face a mask of tears and blood. "I think I did it," he stammered, his voice broken and hollow. "I don't remember, but I had the trigger. I must have pressed it." Butcher's grin widened. He reached down and put a hand on Huey's shoulder. It was meant to be a comforting gesture, but in the dim light, it looked more like a predator claiming its prey. "Yeah, you did, kid," Butcher said, his voice rough but approving. "You did good. Welcome to the F***N Club." Huey just shook his head, retreating back into his own personal hell. Frenchie found a shovel and began to scoop the larger chunks of Translucent into heavy-duty garbage bags. "What are we gonna do with all of him?" Huey asked, his voice barely a whisper. He was still sitting on the floor watching the process with horrified fascination. "Can't just bury him," Butcher said, glancing at the ceiling as if looking through the floorboards. "Golden boy up there's got X-ray vision. He'll spot a grave from 5 miles up." He paced for a moment, the gears in his head turning. "The sea," Butcher said finally, a stroke of grim genius lighting up his eyes. "We take what's left of Casper the horny ghost here, we stick him in a box, and we dump him in the drink." "The sea?" Frenchie asked, pausing his frantic scrubbing of the floor. "What good is that gonna do?" "There's another fish F***R in the 7, ain't there?" Butcher explained, a nasty smirk playing on his lips. "He's always talking to his underwater pals. We dump this in the sewer outfall, sooner or later one of his little guppy mates is gonna find it. The message gets back to the fish boy, he tells Vought, and they know we're not F***N around." "But what about Homelander?" Huey asked, his voice trembling. "Won't he see it?" "Lead," Butcher said, tapping the side of his head. "We get a box lined with zinc or lead, blocks his vision. He won't see a damn thing." Damn. I watched them work for a while longer, ensuring the timeline was secure. Butcher was smart. He was turning Vought's own strengths against them. I switched feeds. The boys were handling their mess. It was time to see how the other side of the war was faring. Damn. The first sign of trouble for Vought came from a grainy cell phone video that hit the internet like a wildfire in a dry forest. The footage was shaky and dark. It showed Starlight in a damp alleyway, brutally disabling 2 men. There was no context, no audio of what led up to it, just a flash of blinding light, the sound of bones breaking, and 2 crumpled bodies on the ground. By morning, the news cycle was dominated by outrage. Vought's carefully crafted narrative of the girl next door from Iowa was being dismantled. Pundits were painting her as a violent vigilante. Starlight Terror was the #1 trending topic. The talking heads were on every channel, debating the lack of accountability for Sups, questioning Vought's vetting process, and demanding answers. I watched the internal Vought communications channels light up with pure panic. Their new star was becoming a PR nightmare overnight. My surveillance feed from Madeline Stillwell's office flickered to life. I saw her sitting at her desk, a picture of corporate fury. Ashley was a mess. She was pacing frantically back and forth, a tablet clutched in her hand like a lifeline, her face pale and sweating. "Her approval rating is in freefall," Ashley stammered, her voice a high-pitched squeak of terror. "We're down 15 points in 6 hours. The focus groups are a disaster. They're calling her unhinged, a menace. We're getting hammered on social media. It's a bloodbath." "Get it under control," Ashley, Madeline said, her voice dangerously calm. "That's what I pay you for." "We're trying. We've pushed the she was stopping a mugging narrative, but there's no proof. It's her word against 2 guys in the hospital claiming they were just asking for directions," Ashley wailed. "It's a PR nightmare." Just as the panic in the room reached its peak, a new alert flashed on Ashley's tablet. She stopped pacing abruptly, staring at the screen, her eyes widening. "Wait," she breathed, "wait a minute." She tapped the screen and turned the tablet towards Madeline. It was a live feed from a local news station. A young woman, her arm in a sling and her face bruised, was standing in front of a bank of microphones. "My name is Heather," she said, her voice shaking. "And Starlight saved my life. Those men weren't asking for directions. They were trying to R***e me, and she stopped them. She's a hero." The story exploded, this time in the opposite direction. The narrative just did a triple backflip with a perfect landing. Starlight was a real hero who had saved an innocent woman from a horrific crime. The authenticity of the victim's testimony was a bolt of lightning that incinerated the old narrative. By noon, #StarlightSaves was the #1 trending topic worldwide. News outlets were running Heather's tearful account on a loop. Starlight, the girl from Iowa, the one they had tried to mold into a vapid S**X symbol, had accidentally become the most popular and respected hero in America. The mood in Madeline's office shifted from sheer terror to calculating avarice in the blink of an eye. "The focus groups are off the charts," Ashley said, her voice now filled with a manic excitement. "They love her. They love the authenticity, the real hero saving one of her own. Her approval rating has jumped 30 points in the last hour. She's polling higher than Maeve now. I've seen the numbers, Ashley, Madeline said, her tone dismissive, the crisis already a forgotten memory. What's the plan? We lean into it, Ashley said. We pivot her brand. We ditch the shining light tagline and go with something more empowering. Starlight, the people's hero. We can launch a whole new line of merchandise. Fine, Madeline said, but first we need to address the optics. Her current costume, it's too wholesome, too much fabric. It doesn't fit the powerful, take-charge woman narrative we're now selling. I agree, Ashley said eagerly. It's not edgy enough. I watched as they called Starlight into the office. She walked in with a hopeful smile on her face. She thought she was being called in to be congratulated, and she was, in a way. Annie, darling, Madeline began, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. We are so proud of you. What you did last night was truly heroic. You represent the very best of what Vought stands for. Thank you, Ms. Madeline, Starlight said, her cheeks flushing with pride. Your approval ratings are through the roof, Ashley chimed in. You're a star. And because you're such a star, Madeline continued, gesturing to a man who had been standing silently in the corner, we've had our top designer, Ruben, create something for you. Something that reflects your new status as a premier hero. Ruben stepped forward and unveiled a mannequin. On it was a new costume, if you could call it that. It was essentially a white bikini with a flowing cape. It was a porn star's idea of a superhero outfit. Starlight's smile vanished. Her face went pale. What is that? It's your new look, Ashley chirped. It's bold, it's powerful, it's a bathing suit, Starlight said, her voice flat. It's a testament to the strength and beauty of the female form, Ruben the designer interjected, his voice oily. I wanted to create something that says, I am a woman, hear me roar. I'm not wearing that, Starlight said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Madeline's warm facade evaporated, replaced by a mask of cold business. Annie, we've invested a lot of money in you. We've given you a platform, a chance to be one of the 7. This is part of the job. The job, Starlight shot back, her idealism fighting a losing battle against the cynical reality of the room. My mother and I, we designed my costume together when I was a little girl. It's supposed to stand for something, for hope, for modesty. I became a hero to save people, not to sell S*X. You became a hero because we let you, Madeline said, her voice like ice. You signed a contract, Annie, a very comprehensive contract. It has clauses covering image, branding, and wardrobe. You gave us the right to control your look. And this is your new look. I designed Homelander's suit, Ruben added, as if this were the irrefutable argument. Do you think he questioned my taste? Starlight looked from Madeline's cold eyes to Ashley's pleading face, to the leering grin of the designer. She was trapped, a cog in a machine that was about to grind her values into dust. The hope in her eyes died, replaced by a look of bitter resignation. A few days passed. The Z-drug crisis was in full swing, and Starlight's revealing costume had debuted to a predictable storm of media attention, both positive and negative. Vought spun the negative attention into a narrative about female empowerment. It was nauseatingly effective. Translucent was still officially missing. My camera feed in Madeline's office captured the moment Homelander finally decided to address it. He simply walked into her office without knocking, arms crossed, his expression one of supreme impatience. He's still missing, Homelander said, his voice a low rumble. Madeline didn't even look up from her paperwork. Who's missing, dear? Don't play dumb, Madeline. Translucent. It's been days. A member of the 7 doesn't just go missing. Oh, I'm sure he's fine, she said, her tone dismissive, like a mother placating a worried child. He's probably hiding in the women's restroom at some department store, getting his kicks. You know how he is. He'll turn up when he gets bored or hungry. This is embarrassing, the Homelander growled. It makes us look weak. What's embarrassing is your performance at the Pentagon meeting yesterday, Madeline said, finally looking up at him, her gaze sharp. We are on the verge of getting Supes into national defense, John. This is the culmination of 60 years of work, and you need to sell it. The speech you're giving tomorrow at the memorial has to be perfect. I know what I'm doing, Homelander said. Do you? She countered. You need to be humble and relatable. You need to talk about sacrifice and about service. You need to make them feel like you're one of them, just with a little extra firepower. Homelander stared at her for a long moment. I'll give them a speech they'll never forget, he said with a wink. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 17, Chapter 17, Kimiko Miyashiro, 1. The days following the translucent incident were a period of quiet anticipation. My primary focus remained on the chaotic little band of soup hunters led by Billy Butcher. Having a member of the Seven turn into a human confetti bomb in their basement was a ticking time bomb. It would force them to get reckless. They needed tangible dirt on Vought, and I knew exactly which desperate soul they would turn to first. My web of microscopic eyes and ears, spread across their digital and physical lives, was now trained on a singular purpose, waiting for the inevitable pivot to Popclaw. She was their canonical link to the Compound V supply chain, and I just had to wait for the show to catch up. I saw Butcher and Huey, in their laughably unconvincing technician jumpsuits, bluff their way into Popclaw's apartment. I saw the teddy bear camera go live, its glassy eye becoming my own personal window into her pathetic life. I watched as A-Train's public betrayal on national television, his casual dismissal of their relationship in a post-race interview, shattered her world. It was the final push she needed to self-destruct. The dominoes were falling, right on schedule. The confrontation, when it came, was a grimly satisfying piece of theater. Butcher, a predator in his natural habitat, masterfully cornered the terrified Popclaw. My audio feeds picked up every sob, every lie, every desperate plea. I listened as he broke her down, peeling away her defenses with a practiced efficiency until he got what he came for. I heard him on the phone once, she shrieked, her voice cracking under the pressure. He was angry, yelling at someone about a shipment being late. He mentioned a place, a front, a church, some shining light charity group. That's all I know, I swear. Butcher's crew now had their lead. While Butcher was busy planning his holy crusade, I was getting to work. So they're going to play cops and robbers at a church while you go straight for the prize? The system's voice quipped in my head. It's like having the cheat codes to a video game. I approve. It's about efficiency, I thought, pulling up a satellite map of the city. The location was already marked in my memory. Peking Szechuan Noodle, a nondescript restaurant in a part of town that tourists never visited. This mission was different from my previous hunts. This was an acquisition. A high-value asset was waiting in that basement, and I intended to claim her before Butcher's sledgehammer crew could turn her into just another blunt instrument for their crusade. I needed to be fast. I donned my ghost attire. The functional clothing, the gloves, and the simple black mask that hid my face. As Butcher's team set up their pointless stakeout across from the Shining Light Center, their vana-beacon of amateur surveillance, I drove my untraceable sedan and parked it in a shadowed alley several blocks away from the noodle shop. The sun was beginning to set, painting the undersides of the clouds in shades of orange and purple. Infiltration was trivial. I shrank down to the size of a rat in the quiet solitude of the car. The world outside the window expanded into a vast cityscape. I slipped out through a door seal, an almost invisible speck on the grimy pavement. The journey to the restaurant was a perilous one. I dodged the lumbering feet of pedestrians, which descended like meteors from the sky. I navigated the treacherous canyons of cracks in the pavement and finally reached the back of the building. I found a grimy ventilation grate and slipped through its bars. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of smells and sounds. Garlic, ginger, boiling oil, shouting cooks, clattering woks. I navigated the hazardous landscape, a tiny shadow moving beneath the massive stainless steel tables. I scurried past bubbling fryers and hissing grills, finally finding my way to the storage closet at the back, a small island of relative quiet in the maelstrom. I returned to my full size in the cramped space, the sounds of the restaurant muffled behind the door. A quick scan confirmed my memories were accurate. A reinforced trapdoor, cleverly hidden beneath a stack of soy sauce crates, led down to the subbasement. The electronic lock was a commercial-grade model, but to my hacking mastery, it was a child's puzzle. I bypassed it with a few taps on a burner phone, and the heavy door unlocked with a soft hiss. I descended the concrete staircase into the cold darkness. The lab was exactly as I expected. a clandestine operation with beakers, centrifuges, and several vials of the glowing blue compound V laid out on a steel table. 3 triad members were on guard duty. One was monitoring a small bank of security cameras, his eyes glazed with boredom. The other 2 were playing cards at a small table, their conversation a low murmur in Mandarin. They were alert, but they were only human, and they were expecting a threat to come from the outside world, not from the shadows already in the room with them. 3 bad guys in a basement. Classic, the system commented. Gonna do a cool one-liner? Something like, looks like your luck has run out. No, I thought, my focus absolute as I melted into the deep shadows at the bottom of the stairs. I'm going to be silent. The man at the card table, the one facing away from me, was my first target. I covered the distance in 2 utterly silent steps. Before he could even register a change in the air, my arm was around his throat, one hand clamped over his mouth to stifle any sound, the other applying a brutal pressure to his neck. There was a sharp crack that was audible only to me, and his body went limp. I lowered him to the ground as gently as a sleeping child. His partner looked up from his cards, a questioning look on his face. Hey, you good? He asked, his words lazy with boredom. He never got an answer. I was already on him. I slammed his face into the steel table with controlled force. The impact was a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage. He collapsed sideways before he could make another sound. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 18, chapter 18, Kimiko Miyashiro 2. The third man, the one at the security monitors, finally heard the scuffle. He spun around in his chair, his eyes widening in shock as he saw me standing over the bodies of his comrades. His hand flew to the gun holstered at his hip. He was too slow, infinitely too slow. I kicked the rolling chair out from under him, sending him sprawling to the floor. Before he could recover or even draw his weapon, I was on top of him, my knee pinning his gun hand to the concrete. My other hand delivered an open palm chop to the side of his neck. His body went limp, his attempted shout dying in his throat. My attention turned to the back of the lab. She was there, huddled in the far corner, a feral figure in a dirty smock. Her face was hidden behind a curtain of tangled black hair, but I could feel the intensity of her glare, like a physical heat, even from across the room. She had watched the entire thing, a caged observer. Kimiko Miyashiro, the female. I took a slow step towards her, my hands raised to show I was no threat. Her head snapped up, and her eyes locked onto mine. She let out a low growl that seemed to vibrate in my very bones, the sound of a cornered wolf ready to tear out the throat of anything that came near. I knew words were useless here. She didn't speak English, and even if she did, she was too far gone into her traumatized state to listen. Action was the only language she would understand. I approached the cage door. It was secured with a heavy padlock. I ignored it. I gripped the thick steel bars of the door with both hands. Show off, the system quipped. I planted my feet. The steel groaned in protest, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent basement. The welds holding the bars to the frame began to screech and tear, sending sparks into the dim light. With a final effort that sent a jolt of exertion up my arms, I ripped the entire door off its hinges and tossed it aside. It crashed to the floor with a deafening clang that echoed off the concrete walls. She exploded out of it. I had anticipated it, but the sheer speed and ferocity of her attack were still breathtaking. She was a living projectile of pure violence, her hands curled into claws aimed directly at my throat. I met her charge head-on. My combat mastery took over, my body moving with an instinct born of 100 martial arts, my mind a cold supercomputer calculating angles and trajectories. I sidestepped her initial lunge by a razor-thin margin, letting her momentum carry her past me. As she spun around, I moved in. She was a storm, and I was the mountain. She threw a haymaker punch that would have caved in a normal man's skull. I caught her fist in my hand, my grip like a steel vise, the impact sending a shockwave up my arm. She screamed in frustration and tried to claw my face with her other hand. I caught that wrist too. We were locked in a stalemate, a face-to-face tug-of-war in the center of the bloody basement. I could feel the raw power of Supe straining against my own enhanced strength. Her muscles were like coiled steel cables, and her eyes were boring into me, filled with a murderous hatred. While holding her arms in an unbreakable grip, I shifted my weight and swept her legs out from under her. She crashed hard to the floor, but her healing factor was already at work. She bounced back to her feet in an instant, ready to lunge again. But in that brief moment she was down, I had created the opening I needed. As she came at me again, I ducked under her attack, my body moving in a spinning motion that was pure jiu-jitsu. I came up behind her, my arm wrapping around her neck in a textbook rear-naked choke. She thrashed and struggled, her powerful legs kicking wildly, her sharp nails scraping against my arm and tearing through the fabric of my jacket. I felt a stinging pain, but I ignored it. My grip was unbreakable. I applied a controlled pressure enough to cut off the flow of blood to her brain. It was a struggle against a force of nature. For a full 30 seconds, she fought with the desperate strength of a dying animal. Her struggles were so violent I had to brace myself against a table to keep my footing. Then, her movements began to weaken. Her thrashing slowed. Her body went limp, and she slumped forward, her full weight falling against me. I gently lowered her to the ground, my heart pounding from the exertion. My arm throbbed from the force of the impact, but there wasn't a single scratch on it. She was even more powerful than I had anticipated. "Okay, new plan," the system said, its voice a little shaky. "Next time we acquire a feral super soldier, let's bring a tranquilizer gun, a big one." I didn't have time to reply. I scooped her unconscious form into my arms. She was surprisingly light, her body small and seemingly fragile. I had to get out. I carried her to the grated sewer drain in the corner of the room, my pre-planned exit. I ripped the heavy iron grate from its moorings with one hand and descended into the darkness of the city's underbelly. I navigated the dripping tunnels by memory, a map I had studied for hours. After a 10-minute walk through the filth, I emerged from a manhole in the deserted alley where I had parked my car. I gently placed Kimiko in the back seat, covering her with a blanket I had stored, and drove away, melting back into the city's nightlife. Moments later, my audio bugs in the noodle shop picked up new sounds. Shouting, the sounds of a frantic raid. Butcher's crew had finally arrived. "They are all dead or knocked out." Frenchie's confused voice echoed from the basement. "The cage, it is broken. Whatever was in it, it is gone." The drive back to the penthouse was silent. Kimiko was still unconscious in the back seat. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 19, Chapter 19, Kimiko Miyashiro 3. The drive back to the penthouse was a study in surreal tranquility. The city of New York hummed, a symphony of distant sirens, rumbling subways, and the gentle thrum of my sedan's engine. It was a world of mundane normalcy, completely oblivious to the fact that I was driving home with a Tier 2 Supe in my back seat. "You know, for a billionaire CEO, your hobbies are getting really weird," the system's voice commented, breaking the silence in my head. Last week, it was mass assassination. This week, it's kidnapping traumatized super soldiers. What's next? Are we going to try and teach Homelander to love? "This isn't a hobby," I replied, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. Kimiko was a small shape under the blanket. "This is an investment." Right, an investment that can rip your throat out if you look at her the wrong way. My favorite kind of high-risk asset. The system wasn't wrong. This was by far the most dangerous and unpredictable thing I had done. Killing Sups was a binary transaction. They died, I got stronger. But Kimiko, she was a living complication. The private elevator ascended silently to my penthouse. I carried her inside, her small frame surprisingly dense with muscle. The chaos of the noodle shop basement felt a universe away from the minimalist luxury of my home. I bypassed my own bedroom and took her to one of the guest suites. It was a beautifully appointed room with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city, a king-sized bed with ridiculously soft sheets, and an en-suite bathroom bigger than most city apartments. I laid her gently on the bed. Her breathing was even, her face was peaceful in a way it probably hadn't been in years. I stood there for a moment, looking down at her. She was a weapon, forged by cruelty and Compound V, but underneath that, she was just a girl who had been stolen from her life. I left a bottle of water and a plate of fresh fruit on the bedside table. I also left a stack of clean clothes. Then, I walked to the far corner of the room, settled into a plush armchair that offered a clear view of the bed and the door. Patience was a predator's virtue, but it was also a caregiver's necessity. An hour later, she began to stir. Her eyes snapped open, and in a single motion, she shot up into a sitting position. Her body was a tightly coiled spring of primal instinct. Her eyes darted around the unfamiliar room, taking in the clean sheets, the plush carpet, the impossible view of the city skyline. Then her eyes found me. The confusion in her expression was instantly incinerated by a wave of pure rage. A low growl rumbled in her chest. Her hands curled into claws, her knuckles white. She looked like a wolf that had woken up to find itself in a gilded trap with one of its captors. Before she could launch herself across the room, I held up my phone, my movements slow and non-threatening. I had the translation app preloaded. "Calm down," the phone's synthesized Japanese voice said, the sound sterile and calm in the tense silence. "You are safe here." The sound of her native language gave her a moment's pause. Her head tilted, her glare unwavering but now tinged with a flicker of confusion. She was still a breath away from attacking, so I continued, my thumbs moving quickly across the screen. "I am not your enemy, I freed you." She glanced at the open door of the room, then back at me. She wasn't a prisoner here, not in the same way, but that only seemed to make her more suspicious. What did this new captor want? I began to type the story I had formulated on the drive home. "My name is Arian Spencer," the phone spoke. "My company has been tracking a series of illegal experiments conducted by a rogue division within Vought International. These experiments involve a chemical called Compound V." At the mention of Vought, her eyes narrowed. That was a name she knew, a name she hated. "We discovered their operation in that basement," I continued. "They were testing the chemical on unwilling subjects. They were turning people into weapons." I watched her face, looking for any reaction. Her expression was a mask of stone, but I saw the subtle tightening of her jaw. She was listening. "You are one of their victims," the phone said. "They did this to you. They are the enemy." I was framing myself as a third party, an enemy of her enemy. It was a more believable position. She pushed herself off the bed, her movements like a predator testing the boundaries of its new territory. She never took her eyes off me. She circled the room, her bare feet silent on the carpet. She touched the cool glass of the window, her gaze sweeping over the city below. She was processing, trying to make sense of the impossible leap from a filthy basement cage to a sky-high luxury penthouse. "She's not attacking," the system noted in my mind. "That's a good sign, right? Or is she just figuring out the best angle to launch herself at your face from?" "Patience," I replied. She stopped in front of the bedside table and looked at the food and water, then back at me, her expression a mixture of suspicion and a deep hunger. "The food is for you," the phone said. "It is not poisoned." She let out a short hiss, a sound of pure contempt. The idea that I might try to poison her was probably the least surprising thing she had heard all day. But she was also starving. After a long moment, she snatched the apple from the plate, her movements lightning fast. She retreated to the far corner of the room and began to eat, her eyes still locked on me, watching my every move as she devoured the fruit in a few quick bites. I gave her time. I sat in the chair, making myself as non-threatening as possible. I let her finish the apple, then the rest of the fruit. When the plate was empty, she looked at the bottle of water. "It is just water," the phone said. She hesitated, then picked it up, unscrewed the cap, and drank, her throat working as she drained half the bottle in one go. For the next hour, we existed in this state of tense truce. She huddled in the corner like a cornered animal. Me, sitting in the chair, a statue of patience. I knew the next step was the most dangerous. I had to establish a baseline of trust, and that meant showing vulnerability, or at least the appearance of it. I stood up slowly, my hands raised. Her entire body went rigid, a low growl rumbling in her chest. "I am not going to hurt you," I typed, holding the phone out for her to see. "I am going to leave. This room is yours. You are not a prisoner here. The door is unlocked, but I ask you not to leave this room yet. The people outside this apartment are my security. They will not understand. They will see you as a threat." It was a partial lie. Marcus and his team would follow my orders without question, but I needed to create a boundary, a reason for her to stay put while I figured out the next step. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 20, Chapter 20, Kimiko Miyashiro 4. Rest, the phone said. You are safe, we will talk more later. I began to back away slowly towards the door. Her eyes followed my every move, her expression a maelstrom of rage, fear, and confusion. She didn't trust me. She had no reason to, but she also hadn't attacked. I reached the door, opened it, and stepped out into the hallway, closing it softly behind me. The moment the door clicked shut, I heard a crash from inside. I checked the micro camera I had placed in the smoke detector. She had thrown the bedside lamp against the wall, shattering it. Then she had ripped the curtains from their moorings and was now pacing the room like a caged panther, her rage and confusion boiling over. Well, she's redecorating, the system deadpanned. I don't think she likes the minimalist aesthetic. I let her be. She needed to vent, to feel some semblance of control after having none for so long. I went to my office and ordered more food to be sent up to her room, instructing the staff to leave it outside the door. The next few days fell into a pattern. I would enter her room in the morning, always announcing my presence first. I would sit in the chair while she glared at me from her corner. I couldn't rely on the impersonal translation app forever. If I was going to break through to her, I needed a real connection, and that meant speaking her language. Normally, learning a language as complex as Japanese would take years of dedicated study. I didn't have years, but I did have an advantage no other language student on Earth possessed: a brain and body supercharged by the super soldier serum. My mind was a finely tuned machine. My memory was nearly eidetic, my cognitive processing speeds were off the charts, and my ability to recognize and replicate patterns was extraordinary. I instructed my staff to procure every available resource on the Japanese language textbooks, audio courses, dictionaries, and thousands of hours of native film and television. What would have been an insurmountable mountain of data for a normal person was, for me, a challenging but achievable curriculum. I dedicated every waking moment I wasn't with Kimiko to this task. I absorbed grammar rules like a sponge, my enhanced mind seeing the logical structures and patterns that would baffle a normal student. I listened to audio lessons at 5 times the normal speed, my brain effortlessly parsing the sounds and committing them to memory. I watched movies, my mind cross-referencing the spoken dialogue with the subtitles, building an intuitive vocabulary. The system helped. Hey, you missed a kanji on page 347. Don't slack off, boss. The angry Super Wolverine is waiting. It acted as a perfect proctor, pointing out my mistakes and keeping me on track. In 3 days of non-stop mental processing, I had done the impossible. I was fluent. It wasn't the native fluency of a lifetime speaker, but it was a functional command of the language. The next morning, I entered her room. Good morning, I said, my voice calm, the Japanese words feeling practiced. I have brought you breakfast. The first time she heard me speak her language, her reaction was profound. Her head snapped up, her eyes widening in genuine shock. It was a bridge across the chasm of language that separated us. She still didn't speak, but she listened. I would sit there for an hour each day, talking to her. I told her about the city outside her window, about the weather, about the food I had brought her. I told her sanitized stories about Spencer Industries, painting it as a force for good, a rival to the evil Vought. I built my cover story piece by painstaking piece. I told her about the Z-drug crisis, the news of which was now everywhere. I explained that Vought was claiming a new designer drug was responsible for the deaths of 16 Supes at a hotel party. It is a lie, I said, my voice serious. My sources confirm there was no new drug. It was a targeted assassination. Vought has no idea who did it, so they invented a story to control the public and hide their own weakness. They lie about everything, I told her, my gaze steady. They lied about Compound V, they are lying about this massacre. They are the enemy. Slowly, the tension in the room began to lessen. She stopped growling every time I entered. She would still retreat to her corner, but her posture was less aggressive, more watchful. One day, I came in to find she had used the charcoal pencils and sketchbook I'd left her. On a single page was a drawing. It was an angry-looking bird, its wings spread wide, breaking free from a cage of thick bars. It was the first piece of communication she had offered. The breakthrough came a week after her arrival. I was sitting in my usual spot, telling her about a ridiculous news report I had seen about the deep causing a traffic jam with a pod of dolphins in the East River. On a clean page in the sketchbook, she began to draw. Her strokes were fast. She drew a stick figure representation of a man in a hero's cape, his face an arrogant smile. Then she drew another figure, a girl with long hair, tears streaming down her face. She looked up at me, her eyes burning with a question she could not speak. It was a test. Was I just another monster in a costume? I understood immediately. I took the sketchbook and a pencil. Next to her drawing, I drew my own. I drew a simple stylized V of Vought Tower. Then I drew an arrow pointing from the Vought logo to both the leering Supe and the crying girl. Then I drew a large X over the entire Vought logo. They are the cause of all of it. I slid the sketchbook back to her. She looked at my simple drawing, her eyes tracing the lines. Her expression softened for the first time. A flicker of understanding passed between us. She picked up the pencil again. This time, she drew a figure representing me. Then she drew a figure of herself next to me. Then she drew an arrow pointing from the two of us towards the Vought logo. At the end of the arrow, she didn't draw an X. She drew a fist. The message was unmistakable. Us against them. A slow smile spread across my face. Yes, I said softly in Japanese, us against them. I knew then that I had succeeded. I had pulled her back from the brink. The feral animal was receding, and Kimiko Miyashiro was beginning to emerge. I was offering her a new cage, in a way, a cage of vengeance. But it was a cage she had just willingly stepped into. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 21, Chapter 21, Sage Grove Center 1. The acquisition of Kimiko Miyashiro had fundamentally altered the board. Her presence was a constant reminder of the true nature of Vought's business. She was a weapon forged in the fires of Compound V, and I knew she was not the only one. If I recall correctly, they're currently conducting a lot of illegal human research at the Sage Grove Center. This psychiatric hospital in rural Pennsylvania is Vought's dumping ground for failed experiments and unstable sups. More importantly, it was a laboratory, a place where Vought was actively trying to stabilize Compound V for use in adults, a process that often had horrifying results. It was a powder keg filled with dangerous people, and I knew that sooner or later it was going to blow. The canon timeline dictated that Lamplighter would eventually cause a breach that would lead the boys straight to its doorstep. It's the next major nexus of Vought's depravity. This was also an opportunity to plunder new powers and to gather undeniable evidence of Vought's most heinous crimes. From the command center of my penthouse, I began to peel back the layers of Sage Grove's digital security. It was a Vought-owned facility, but it wasn't connected to their main corporate servers. It was an off-the-books operation with its own encrypted network. Ooh, a spooky asylum full of crazy sups, the system commented, its voice cheerful. This looks like a great place to do some aggressive recycling. It's practically a warehouse of walking experience points. This isn't a smash and grab, I murmured, my fingers a blur across the keyboard as I wrote a custom decryption algorithm on the fly. We hit a place like this, we do it once, and we do it perfectly. I hacked the facility's primary food and medical supplier, a Vought subsidiary in Harrisburg. I sifted through their delivery manifests, purchase orders, and employee records. I found anomalies, massive orders for sedatives, restraints, and specialized medical equipment that were far beyond what a normal psychiatric hospital would require. I also found the names of the delivery drivers. I targeted one of the drivers, a man named Frank. Hacking his personal life was laughably easy. I cloned his phone, read his emails, and sifted through his social media. He was a disgruntled employee, constantly complaining about the creepy deliveries to the middle of nowhere. On a local trucking forum, he had even posted a half-joking comment about the spooks at Sage Grove. Using my shapeshifting ability, I created a new persona, Dave, a disgruntled former employee of the same supply company. I created a fake social media profile for Dave, backdating it by several years. I had Dave send Frank a friend request, which he accepted without a second thought. Over the next few days, I engaged him in conversation, bonding over our mutual hatred for our fictional boss. I sent him a message, "Hey man, got a weird request. I have a package to drop off at Sage Grove, a custom comms charger for some new tech. Problem is, the paperwork got screwed up, so it's not on the official manifest. It's a huge headache for me, but a rush job for them. Any chance you could take it and just plug it into a wall socket anywhere in the main reception area next time you're there? The people inside will know to pick it up. There's $500 in it for your trouble." Frank, seeing an easy $500 for a task that required zero extra effort, agreed immediately. The custom comms charger was, of course, a state-of-the-art Spencer Industries Wi-Fi sniffer and network intrusion device, perfectly disguised in the housing of a standard power brick. The next day, Frank made his delivery. I watched via satellite as his truck pulled up to the facility. He went inside, and a few minutes later he came out. My device was now inside their network. From my penthouse, hundreds of miles away, I had a digital beachhead inside one of Vought's most secure black sites. The firewall protecting their internal network was formidable, but now I was on the inside. I unleashed my algorithm, and after 2 hours of digital warfare, I heard the sweet sound of a notification. Access granted. The data was a goldmine. I downloaded everything: patient files, medical records, experimental logs, and hours upon hours of black and white security footage. The patient files were a horror show. Sups with uncontrollable powers, their bodies and minds twisted by unstable doses of compound v. A man who vomited acid. A patient who could phase through walls but couldn't control it, sometimes getting stuck halfway. A young woman whose eyes glowed with a terrifying energy she couldn't turn off. These were victims, lab rats in Vought's cruel experiment. But the most valuable piece of information was the name of the head of the project, the person overseeing this entire nightmare: Stormfront. Her name was all over the experimental logs. She was the driving force behind the push to stabilize Compound V. Her involvement explained the ruthlessness of the operation. This was a top priority initiative. So the super Nazi is running a secret human experiment lab. Shocker, the system deadpanned. What's next? You gonna tell me water is wet? I'm not looking for surprises. I'm looking for an opening, I replied. And these labs are where Vought hides their most expensive mistakes. I used my Spencer Industries resources to procure a fleet of 5 micro-drones. They were the size of dragonflies, with silent electric motors and high-resolution cameras. They were coated in a radar-absorbent material that made them virtually invisible to most detection systems. Over the next week, I conducted a meticulous physical survey of the Sage Grove Center from a distance. I flew the drones in sweeping patterns, mapping the facility's layout, the guard patrols, the delivery schedules. I identified the blind spots in their camera coverage, the weak points in their perimeter fence, and the patterns of the staff. I learned that Stormfront visited the facility twice a week, always arriving and departing in an unmarked Vought helicopter. Her presence meant security was at its absolute peak. Any move I made would have to be when she was gone. My drones also identified a familiar chain-smoking orderly, Lamplighter. "So what's the plan?" the system asked. "Are we going to bust in there, guns blazing, or are we going to do your usual spooky ghost routine?" Neither, I thought, my eyes scanning the live drone feed on my main monitor. Not yet. For now, this is purely an intelligence-gathering operation. I'm mapping the facility, learning its routines, and cataloging every soup inside. When the time is right, I will hit this place, and I will be prepared to neutralize every single threat in one clean operation. This will be my next big harvest. I spent the following days in a state of patient readiness. My power arsenal was formidable, but I continued to practice, honing my control over cryokinesis and shapeshifting, pushing the limits of my upgraded size alteration. I had a Tier 1 power, but I was still a novice in its use. I needed mastery if I was going to take down an entire facility of unstable sups. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 22, Chapter 22, Sage Grove Center 2. The night was moonless, a perfect shroud for the work to be done. For weeks, the Sage Grove Center had been a collection of data points on my monitors, a web of digital ghosts and drone footage. Tonight, it was a physical reality, a sprawling complex crouched in the heart of the Pennsylvania wilderness, utterly oblivious to the storm that was about to break over it. My preparation had been absolute. Every guard rotation was memorized. Every camera's blind spot was mapped. Every patient's file was a dossier of threats and opportunities committed to my enhanced memory. I knew this place better than the people who worked here. I sat in the driver's seat of my untraceable sedan, parked in a dense thicket of trees a mile from the facility's perimeter. The final pieces of my plan were falling into place. "Showtime, boss," the system's voice echoed in my head, its usual humor sharpened by an edge of anticipation. "The dungeon is prepped, the mobs are sleeping. Time to clear the instance and get that sweet, sweet loot." "Let's just hope the drops are worth the effort," I replied. "Because if I'm walking into this mess, I'm not leaving empty-handed." I looked into the rearview mirror, my own face staring back at me. I activated my shape-shifting power. The unsettling sensation washed over me as my bones shifted and my facial features reformed. In seconds, the face looking back was utterly anonymous. A man of average height, with plain features, brown hair, and the kind of forgettable face that would vanish from memory the moment you looked away. Over this new face, I pulled on my simple black mask, adding a final layer of anonymity. My attire was the same functional gear I used for all my operations. I left the car and moved through the woods with the unnatural silence of a predator. I reached the perimeter fence, a 12-foot-high chain-link barrier topped with razor wire. I simply shrank and slipped through one of the links in the fence. I scurried across the manicured lawns, a tiny shadow darting between the security lights. My drone surveillance had given me a perfect map. I knew the location of the main ventilation hub for the entire facility, an unassuming maintenance building set 50 yards away from the main asylum. At my current size, the gap under the door was a gaping cavern. I slipped inside. The air was filled with the loud hum of the massive air circulation units. I navigated the maze of machinery, found the primary intake duct, and returned to my full size. From my inventory, I retrieved the high-yield canister of CX9. The nozzle was custom-fitted for this exact purpose. I attached it to the duct, the magnetic clamps locking on with a satisfying thunk. I set the dispersal timer for 10 minutes, a long duration to ensure an inescapable concentration that would neutralize even the most durable sups. With the timer set, I shrank back down to the size of an insect and found a perch on the ceiling, waiting for my silent weapon to do its work. The gas was completely invisible. The facility's own ventilation system became my accomplice, pumping the potent anesthetic into every room, every cell, every hallway. I watched through the network of micro-drones I had positioned earlier, their feeds displayed on my phone interface. Guards on patrol simply slumped to the floor, their rifles clattering beside them. Nurses at their stations collapsed forward onto their desks. Inside the patient rooms, the chaos and the screaming that had been a constant audio backdrop simply faded away. The entire facility fell into a deep slumber. I returned to my full size in the ventilation hub, a ghost in a sleeping machine. I entered the main asylum building through a service corridor, using my phone to bypass the electronic lock with a quick burst of Spencer Industries code. My first targets were the remaining security personnel in the central control room. I found them slumped in their chairs. 2 silenced shots from my Spectre pistol ensured they would never wake up. My next target was a significant one, Lamplighter. I knew from the staff rosters that he was on the night shift in the East Wing. I moved through the silent hallways. I found him in the orderly's station, passed out with his head on a desk, a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey beside him. The former member of the Seven, the man who had burned Mallory's grandchildren, a pathetic shell of a Supe, reduced to this. There was a certain poetic justice in what I was about to do. I reached out, my hand hovering over his head. I activated my cryokinesis. The air around Lamplighter instantly dropped to sub-zero temperatures. A thin layer of frost bloomed on his skin, on his clothes, on the desk around him. I pushed the power further. The frost thickened into a solid sheet of ice. His body was encased in a tomb of his own making. The pyrokinetic ended his miserable life frozen solid, a monument to his own failure. With the staff neutralized, I turned my attention to the patients, the real reason I was here. I moved from cell to cell, a methodical reaper. The patient files I had downloaded were my checklist. The tongue patient, a man whose only power was a grotesque tongue, was dispatched with a single stab to the brainstem with my carbon fiber knife. The phasing patient presented a unique challenge. She was unconscious, but her power was still active. Her body was flickering between a solid and an intangible state. I couldn't stab a ghost, so I waited, my super soldier senses tracking the rhythm of her phasing. In the split second her form became solid, my knife darted out, ending her miserable existence. The acid vomit patient, the wall-punching patient, the zapped lights patient. One by one, they met the same quiet end. They were Vought's mistakes, their failed experiments, and I was the janitor cleaning up the mess. Then came the more dangerous ones, the unnamed Tier 4s my scans had identified. One was a man with a rock-like hide. The knife wouldn't work. I simply placed my hand on his head and, using my own Tier 4 superhuman strength, applied a brutal pressure. His reinforced skull cracked like a nutshell. One was a woman who could generate concussive blasts. I froze her lungs solid from the outside. Another was a man with enhanced senses so acute he could hear a heartbeat a mile away. A precise icicle formed from the moisture in the air and plunged through his temple ended his watch. Each one was a potential threat, and each one was eliminated with the same detached efficiency. Another had some form of low-level pyrokinesis. Even unconscious, the air around his body was hot. I used my cryokinesis to instantly snuff out his power, flash freezing him just as I had Lamplighter. Cindy, the powerful telekinetic, was a major threat. I found her strapped to a bed in a reinforced solitary cell. Even unconscious, there was a palpable aura of power around her. I froze the entire room solid, encasing her and the bed in a block of opaque ice, ensuring that even if she woke up, her power would be useless. Then, and only then, did I approach and deliver the final blow. Love Sausage was in the next cell. The sight of his power, even while inert, was as ridiculous as the stories suggested. I dispatched him with a professional detachment that bordered on boredom. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 23, Chapter 23, Sam Riordan. The silence that followed the initial purge was a heavy blanket draped over the facility. My gaze then settled upon the 10 Tier 5 Sups, individuals whose abilities had always been deemed either too insignificant or too peculiar to warrant genuine concern. They were the forgotten horrific designs. I recalled their files. A man who conversed with houseplants, a woman whose power resided in the ephemeral shift of her fingernail color. Their existence had been as quiet as their end would be. With a swift extension of my cryokinesis, their breaths simply ceased. Their passing was as unnoticed as their lives had ever been, another muted note in the asylum's grim symphony. Only a formidable target now remained. The files had marked him as the strongest patient within the entire facility, a name that resonated with an almost mythic power within these walls: Sam Riordan. My steps led me down a corridor, its very architecture hinting at the immense force it contained. At its end stood his cell, a testament to his perceived threat. The door was a massive slab of solid steel. Inside, the room itself was a padded cube designed to absorb impact, to contain the uncontrollable. The potent CX-9 I had unleashed had indeed touched him, yet his extraordinary durability had fiercely fought against its worst effects. He was on his knees in the room's center, but his eyes were open. As I stepped into his space, his head lifted slowly. His eyes were bloodshot, seething with a potent rage. "You," he growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the padded walls. "You did this." With an explosive surge, he launched himself to his feet. He was a mountain of muscle, radiating pure fury. "Oh, boss, this one's a raid boss." The system's voice cut through my thoughts, a tense whisper in my mind. Sam moved with a terrifying velocity, far swifter than a man of his colossal size should ever be. The padded floor tore under the sheer force of his charge, fibers ripping with a harsh sound. To meet such a brute force head-on would have been a fool's errand, an act of suicide even for me, despite my own augmented strength. I sidestepped, letting his overwhelming momentum carry him past my position. As he thundered by, my hand touched the floor. In that instant, the entire padded surface of his cell flash froze, the soft material hardening into a treacherous sheet of unforgiving ice. Sam lost his footing while caught in his own unstoppable charge. His massive feet slid out from under him, betraying his weight. He crashed heavily onto his back, his head striking the ice-covered wall with a sickening thud. It was a blow that would have instantly killed any normal human. He merely grunted, his powerful body absorbing the impact. He struggled, his massive hands scrabbling for purchase on the slick surface. As he attempted to rise, I extended both my hands, and from my fingertips, a torrent of absolute zero energy poured forth. Ice exploded upwards from the floor, coiling around him, pinning his struggling form to the ground. He roared in raw fury, his muscles straining against the icy bonds. Cracks began to spiderweb across the ice, a testament to his phenomenal strength. I walked calmly towards the struggling giant. His focus was entirely consumed by the desperate effort to shatter the ice that encased his limbs. He didn't perceive my presence as I knelt beside his head. "It's over," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. His head snapped towards me, his eyes burning with pure hatred. He opened his mouth, preparing to unleash another roar. I plunged my hand into his open mouth. My cryokinesis now channeled itself into a single point of intense cold. I flash froze him from the inside out. The roar died in his throat, replaced by a gurgling sound. A visible wave of frost spread across his skin, turning it a deathly blue. In less than 3 seconds, the most powerful inmate in Sage Grove was a frozen statue, his struggle abruptly ended. With Sam Riordan now an icy monument, the asylum was completely pacified. Every Supe, from the weakest with their bizarre talents to the most formidable, was now a silent part of the facility's grim history. My next destination was the sub-level laboratory, because it was the true heart of the facility. I found what I sought within a series of gleaming cryostorage units. These units held rack after rack of glowing blue vials containing Vought's carefully stabilized compound V. This was their entire supply and the lifeblood of their horrific experiments. I opened my inventory and began my work. Each storage container was systematically emptied. Hundreds of vials worth a fortune beyond any terrestrial measure vanished into a single expanding grid within my system's inventory. These vials represented a strategic asset of unimaginable value. This lab was a treasure trove of multi-million-dollar machinery. Centrifuges spun quietly while gene sequencers hummed with dormant power and chemical analyzers stood sentinel. All of it was proprietary Vought R&D that stood as a testament to their relentless pursuit of power. Leaving it behind would offer them the chance to rebuild their research and reignite their sinister fires. That was unacceptable. I moved through the lab with my hands becoming a blur of practiced motion. The expensive instruments of their horrific science disappeared into my inventory one by one. In under 5 minutes, I stripped the once bustling lab bare until it was nothing but a stark collection of empty steel tables and useless power outlets. I plugged Spencer Industries' data spike into their central server. As it began its silent work of copying every piece of research, every experimental log, and every hidden file onto an encrypted drive, I initiated a secondary protocol, a military-grade data wipe. Even as my spike copied the last of their files, it simultaneously overwrote the originals with layers of meaningless code, corrupting them beyond any conceivable hope of recovery. When the download was finally complete, a small indicator light flashing green, I removed the spike. The server was now nothing more than a hollowed-out shell. I retrieved my CX-9 canister from the ventilation hub, ensuring that no trace of the gas dispersal system remained. I meticulously confirmed that every victim was accounted for, their bodies undisturbed. The scene was perfectly set. A mass death event, a tragic incident. Vought would arrive to find their valuable assets dead, their labs stripped bare, and their servers wiped clean. They would have no answers, only a torrent of maddening questions. I walked back to the central security office. The guards remained slumped in their chairs, a silent fixture of my handiwork. I sat down at their console and initiated the final cleanup. With a few precise commands, I triggered a deep-level format of the entire security system's hard drives, systematically erasing every byte of recorded data, every fleeting shadow of my presence. My last act was to ensure Vought would have nothing left to analyze, not even molecular residue. I returned to the now empty sub-level laboratory. In the precise center of the sterile room, I carefully placed a Spencer Industries grade incendiary charge. It was a thermite device, engineered to burn at an unimaginable intensity, over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. I set the timer for 30 minutes, more than enough time for me to be miles away. With the data secured and the charges meticulously set, I made my exit. I shrank down to the size of a fly, a tiny speck, and slipped out of the facility through a cracked window pane, leaving the doomed asylum behind me. I returned to my car as the first faint hints of dawn began to paint the horizon, an ethereal glow. I was already a few miles down the highway, heading east towards New York, when I glanced in my rearview mirror. There an angry orange glow bloomed. The fire would be a ferocious inferno warp concrete into grotesque shapes and reduce any microscopic trace of my presence to ash. The drive back to New York was a peaceful journey. My mind felt like a calm sea after the storm, the turbulent currents of my mission now settled into a tranquil stillness. P.S. Sam Riordan was previously held here at the Sage Grove Center. After the facility was eventually destroyed by the inmates, he was transferred to the woods. Goal: 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 24, Chapter 24, Harvest. I stood in the silent sanctuary of my office. The city lights a glittering tapestry behind the armored glass. The faint orange glow on the horizon from the burning asylum had long since faded. I sank into the cool leather of my chair, the exhaustion of the long night a distant hum beneath a sea of adrenaline and anticipation. The real prize was the raw power I had harvested, waiting to be processed. System, I said, my voice laced with an undercurrent of excitement. It's time. Oh, I have been waiting for this. The system's voice boomed in my head, filled with the giddy energy of a kid on Christmas morning. Let's unwrap these presents. The Plunder queue is stacked and ready to go, boss. The interface in my vision lit up a long list of my night's work. It was a testament to my ruthless efficiency. The processing began with the biggest prize of all. Plunder queue processing. Supe neutralized, Sam Riordan. Powers detected. Super Strength Tier 2, Super Defense Tier 2, Super Stamina Tier 2, Super Speed Tier 2, Super Hearing Tier 2. Choose option, Retain or Convert. A full suite of Tier 2 physical enhancements that would blow my existing Tier 4 powers out of the water. Retain all of them, I replied, my decision instantaneous. And what happens to my current strength and durability powers? When you integrate a superior version of a power, the inferior version is automatically flagged for recycling, the system explained. You can't have 2 super strength powers running at the same time. The old ones will be converted to XP. Smart move, boss. Do it. Powers Super Strength Tier 2, Super Defense Tier 2, Super Stamina Tier 2, Super Speed Tier 2, and Super Hearing Tier 2, successfully integrated. Redundant powers detected. Super Strength Tier 4 and Super Defense Tier 4, converting to experience points. Conversion complete. You have gained 1,000 XP. The sensation was a fundamental rewriting of my physical limits. I felt my muscle fibers condense, my bone density increasing exponentially. My senses exploded outwards, the quiet hum of my computer becoming a symphony of electronic noise, the scent of my coffee now a complex bouquet of roasted beans and filtered water. I felt an ocean of energy welling up inside me. The list continued. Supe neutralized, lamplighter. Powers detected. Fire manipulation Tier 3, Super Defense Tier 3, Regeneration Tier 3. Choose option, retain or convert. My cryokinesis was a god tier power, but versatility was key. Having mastery over both ice and fire would make me an absolute terror on any battlefield. Retain fire manipulation. Convert the rest. Power fire manipulation Tier 3, successfully integrated. Powers Super Defense Tier 3 and Regeneration Tier 3, converted to experience points. Conversion complete. You have gained 3,000 XP. A wave of warmth spread through me. It was a deep understanding of combustion and plasma. Supe neutralized, Cindy. Powers detected. Telekinesis Tier 3, Super Defense Tier 3. Choose option, retain or convert. Retain telekinesis. Convert durability. Power telekinesis Tier 3, successfully integrated. Power super defense Tier 3, converted to experience points. Conversion complete. You have gained 1500 XP. A new sense opened up in my mind, a feeling of connection to the physical objects around me. I focused on a pen on my desk, and it levitated an inch into the air. It was a versatile tool. Supe neutralized, phasing patient. Power detected, teleportation Tier 4. Choose option, retain or convert. This was a crucial addition to my ghost toolkit. Retain. Power teleportation Tier 4, successfully integrated. My understanding of space momentarily warped, a dizzying sensation of points A and B becoming conceptually linked. Supe neutralized, love sausage. Power detected, prehensile and elastic penis Tier 4. Choose option, retain or convert. Please say convert, please say convert. The universe is weird enough already, the system begged. Convert, I replied, a smirk touching my lips. Thank you, conversion complete. You have gained 500 XP. The list became a rapid-fire conversion process, each one a small but vital contribution to the whole. Supe neutralized, Tim, power telekinesis Tier 4, convert. Convert, plus 500 XP. Supe neutralized, tiny hero, power size alteration Tier 3, convert. Convert, plus 1500 XP. Supe neutralized, acid vomit patient. Powers, acidic vomit Tier 4, super strength Tier 4, super defense Tier 4, convert. Convert, plus 1500 XP. Supe neutralized, wall punching patient. Powers, super strength Tier 4, super defense Tier 4, convert. Convert, plus 1000 XP. Supe neutralized, EMP dude patient. Power, electromagnetic pulse emission Tier 4, convert. Convert, plus 500 XP. And on it went. The remaining Tier 4s and the mountain of Tier 5s were all fed into the furnace, their existences rendered down into quantifiable power. Processing 5 generic Tier 4 subs, plus 2500 XP. Processing 11 generic Tier 5 subs, plus 1100 XP. When the last notification faded, a grand summary materialized on my screen, the final tally of my night's monumental effort. Grand harvest complete. Final XP tally. Redundant power conversions, 1000 XP. Lamplighter conversions, 3000 XP. Cindy conversion, 1500 XP. Named Supe conversions, 5700 XP. Generic Supe conversions, 3600 XP. Total XP GAINED, 15,300 XP. Previous XP, 700 XP. Current XP, 16,000. Updated power list. Cryokinesis Tier 1. Super Strength Tier 2. Super Defense Tier 2. Super Stamina Tier 2. Super Speed Tier 2. Super Hearing Tier 2. Regeneration Tier 2. Fire Manipulation Tier 3. Telekinesis Tier 3. Shapeshifting Tier 3. Size Alteration Tier 3. Carbon Skin Tier 3. Teleportation Tier 4. I stared at the screen, a feeling of almost overwhelming power settling over me. 16,000 experience points. It was a king's ransom. System, I said, my voice calm. Initiate upgrade interface. Right away, boss. Let's go from badass to god mode. The screen changed, focusing on my list of powers. Regeneration, upgrade to Tier 1. Power selected, regeneration Tier 2. Upgrade to Tier 1 requires 5,000 XP. Current XP, 16,000. Do you wish to proceed? Confirm. Deducting 5,000 XP. Upgrade complete. Regeneration is now Tier 1. Note, at this level, recovery is near instantaneous. Complete bodily destruction can be regenerated from a single surviving cell, provided the brain's core consciousness is not entirely obliterated. Think Deadpool-level bullshit. A profound energy surged through me. It felt like every cell in my body was now a self-replicating engine of life. I was practically immortal. Super strength, upgrade to Tier 1. Power selected, Super Strength Tier 2. Upgrade to Tier 1 requires 5,000 XP. Current XP, 11,000. Do you wish to proceed? Confirm. Deducting 5,000 XP. Upgrade complete. Super Strength is now Tier 1. Note, physical strength is now on par with the planet's most powerful beings. You can lift skyscrapers, punch through mountains, and treat tanks like tin cans. Welcome to the Homelander level. My muscles coiled with a power that was terrifying in its scope. The steel frame of my chair groaned under the passive pressure of my grip. I felt like I could tear the planet in half. Super Defense, upgrade to Tier 1. Power selected, Super Defense Tier 2. Upgrade to Tier 1 requires 5,000 XP. Current XP, 6,000. Do you wish to proceed? Confirm. Deducting 5,000 XP. Upgrade complete. Super Defense is now Tier 1. Note, bodily tissues are now functionally indestructible by conventional means. High-caliber rounds will feel like raindrops. Nuclear explosions might give you a tan. Welcome, again, to the Homelander level. A feeling of absolute solidity settled over me. My skin, my bones, my organs, they were something far harder, far more resilient. The concept of being hurt by a bullet or a bomb now felt absurd, a problem for a lesser species. I leaned back in my chair, the upgrades settling into my very soul. My final status glowed on the interface. Final status. Current XP, 1,000. Powers. Cryokinesis, Tier 1. Regeneration, Tier 1. Super Strength, Tier 1. Super Defense, Tier 1. Super Stamina, Tier 2. Super Speed, Tier 2. Super Hearing, Tier 2. Fire Manipulation, Tier 3. Telekinesis, Tier 3. Shapeshifting, Tier 3. Size Alteration, Tier 3. Carbon Skin, Tier 3. Teleportation, Tier 4. Goal, 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. Alright, legends, that's it for today. If you're ready for the next chapter, smash that like button and flood the comments right now. Remember, we've got 3 days to prove this story needs to continue. Subscribe so you don't miss the drop, and I'll meet you in the next audiobook.